and it's beneath you, and it's beneath this Congress. And that is why I have such a problem with this. And then you leak further information. This is the problem here. And we can be righteous about trying to get this president or not, but when it comes, people are getting so turned off by this whole thing. When we understand that, because you could have handled this differently, you and Mr. Schiff, I'm going to blame the chairman because I hold the member, the one with the pen, responsible. So I'm going to say he ordered this. He was the one that said their name, one who can't come and defend that. Unfortunately, he sent you, and you had to take it. That's wrong, and this committee deserves better. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question here is the potential of abuse of the president's power to benefit himself. Now, America is based on free and fair elections, and after Russia interfered in the 2016 election, the American people are rightfully concerned about foreign interference. And keeping that in mind, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Goldman, the following question. Ambassador Sondland testified that according to Rudy Giuliani, quote, President Trump wanted a public statement committing to investigations of Burisma and the 2016 election. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Ambassador Sondland testified, as the screen in front of you shows, that President Zelensky, quote, had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them.
Correct.
Mr. Goldman, you're an experienced former prosecutor. Is it common to announce an investigation but conduct the investigation?
No, usually it works the reverse. Normally you don't investigation because you want to develop as much evidence while it's not public, because if it's public, it into problems of people matching up testimony and witnesses tailoring their testimony, which is part of the reason why the closed depositions in our investigation were so important.
So what did this evidence about tell you about why President Trump would only care about announcing the investigations but not actually conducting them?
There were two things that it said. One is whatever he claims, the president claims about his desire, even if you assume that these investigations are for that purpose, as he has stated, it undermines that because he doesn't actually care if the investigations are done. So even if you assume, which I don't think the evidence supports, that it's corruption, then he's still not doing investigations. And the second is, he just wanted the public announcement. The private confirmation was not enough. And that's an indication that he wanted the political benefit from them.
It looks to me that the announcement of the investigation could benefit the president. The announcement alone could be Twitter fodder between now and the next election to smear a political rival. That's consistent with the findings. You know, President Nixon attempted to corrupt elections, and his agents broke into Democratic Party headquarters to get a leg up on the election. And then he tried to cover it up, just as we've seen some obstruction here. But even more concerning, President Trump not only appears to have abused the power of his office to help his own re-election campaign, he used a foreign government to do his bidding, and he used military aid as leverage to get the job. Was approved by Congress. It was appropriated on a bipartisan basis for Ukraine and Russia, who'd invaded them. And while this aid was withheld, people died while withheld. And some, have argued since ultimately the aid was released that there was not a problem. But Mr. True, that the aid was released only after the president got caught, and only after Congress learned of the scheme to make or death aid conditional on this announcement of investigation of his political rival?
There were several things that made the president realize that this was and could not be concealed. It was circulating around the White House. The congressional committees announced their own investigation. And then perhaps the Washington Post op-ed on September 5th linking the two. The Inspector General notified the committee that there was this whistleblower complaint that was being withheld by the Trump administration.
Correct. Well, I've made it clear throughout this investigation that I don't want to be part of a third impeachment inquiry, but the direct evidence is very damning. And the president hasn't offered any evidence to the contrary. We've subpoenaed, we've invited the president, and nothing has come forward. If he had evidence of his innocence, why wouldn't he bring it forward? You know, this is a very serious matter that strikes at the heart, and it's a concern that we are here. But I've heard over and over again that this is too fast. Well, Ms. Jackson Lee and I were talking. We were both members of this committee during the Clinton impeachment. That took 73 days. We're here on the 76th day. We need to proceed. And I thank you, Mr. Goldman, for your hard work and for your presentation. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Without objection, the hearing will stand in recess for 15 minutes.
Bullshit. Bullshit. These people are out of their minds, y'all.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for watching Fox News Now during these historic impeachment hearings.
Okay.
They're in a 15-minute
Man,
break.
these people are out of their minds.
Have a 30-minute break and they did a roll call.
Out of their minds, man.
Decided not to.
Never seen anything like it.
10 minutes ago, now they're in a 15-minute break. Don't worry.
I'm just
Fox News
experimenting.
Now for all of your continued coverage.
Just experimenting with the live stream, y'all. How you doing, Killer Whale?
Replay from earlier
And
today
L
while
Stacker Ventures.
impeachment hearings to resume right here on Fox News Now.
I was trying to stream over on D Live, but nothing was going on over there.
Another investigation intended to help the president politically. That is it. And you know the president cared about the investigations that would help him politically and not Ukraine and not the national security interest. You don't have to take my word. I'm going to play something from David Holmes, who had worked in the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine and was speaking to Ambassador Sondland, who President Trump appointed. Ambassador Sondland had just come to the Ukraine on the 26th. He met with President Zelensky. He went to a restaurant with Mr. Holmes, the U.S. Political Affairs Counselor in Ukraine. And he called President Trump on his cell phone. Mr. Holmes could hear that call, and then he spoke to Mr. Sondland.
Man, it's raining. I'm surprised I'm even getting out, y'all. I'm sorry. I was just sitting here in La La Land for a second.
He was calling from Kyiv. I heard President Trump then clarify that Ambassador Sondland was in Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland
I mean, I think this is on TV.
went on stage.
I've got to run to town.
He, quote, loves her ass.
I thought I just might leave this stream going.
Do the investigation.
It's starting to rain. We're fixing to get 4 inches of snow tomorrow. It's 61 degrees right now. We're going to get 4 inches of snow tomorrow starting in the morning. Crazy.
That is sworn testimony by David Holmes, who heard it from the president himself. And it was clear to everyone, the most experienced people in government, Donald Trump himself appointed in their positions, they knew what was going on. Let's look at a text message from Ambassador Taylor around this time on September 9th. He said, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold.
But I'm going to leave this running for a bit.
With a political
I
campaign.
shall return.
That is President Trump putting his own political and personal interests over the nation's interests to hold aid desperately needed by Ukraine in order to
I don't know if I'll
back
leave
Russia
this
and
or
show
not.
the support. He did it to help his own campaign. Now, there have been excuses offered by the president. I'd like to briefly talk about those excuses. The first excuse offered by President Trump is that the aid was ultimately released, and President Trump met with Mr. Zelensky. We heard it today. The challenge with that, though, as an excuse, is the aid was only released after President Trump got caught doing this scheme. On September 9th, the committees of this House started their investigation and announced
I don't know where these people come from. Got caught doing what scheme? The scheme they're making up. I mean, come on.
About the moment of the Washington Post on September 5th exposing his scheme. And it was only after that that he met with President Zelensky, not in the White House, but in New York. Another excuse offered.
What's going on,
The president was
McDuffin?
motivated by general corruption concerns. And again, the evidence shows that is not true, that that's what caused him to withhold the aid. President Zelensky, in fact, was elected on an anti-corruption platform. He was a reform candidate. His own people told him again and again, President Zelensky is a hope. He's doing it the right way. They urged him to just be supportive. On his call with President Zelensky on July 25th, President Trump ignored the talking points that were prepared to talk about corruption. He only wanted to talk about two things: the two investigations that helped him politically. Every intelligence agency unanimously supported releasing the aid to Ukraine. That was appropriate. They did a study, a corruption study. They said, release it. The White House never provided an explanation. The aid had already been approved, and it was not for any corruption issues that President Trump withheld it. The next is Ukraine was not pressured. And the argument about that is, well, today they haven't said they were pressured. Well, Ukraine was pressured then and still is pressured. They are desperately in need of the United States support as they battle the threat of Russia. So, of course, they have to be careful what they said. But contemporaneous documents, emails, texts from the Ukrainian officials themselves show the pressure they felt, showed they knew what President Trump was doing, showed what they had to do. This is one from Bill Taylor to, again, Ambassador Gordon Sondland and Ambassador Kurt Volker. Gordon, one thing Kurt and I talked about yesterday was Sasha Dominiak, a senior aide of President Zelensky, point that President Zelensky is sensitive about Ukraine being taken seriously, not merely an instrument in Washington's domestic re-election politics. They not only felt the pressure, they got the message. They were not going to get a White House meeting. They were ultimately not going to get military aid unless they furthered President Trump's re-election efforts. That is a corrupt abuse of power. Another argument that's made is that Trump never said quid pro quo. And what you're going to hear is on a call with Ambassador Sondland, after a Washington Post article came out on September 5th, which we will look at. After there was a Washington Post article that came out that, again, exposed the Ukrainian scheme. Days after that, President Trump was on a phone call with Ambassador Sondland, and there was no quid pro quo because he got caught. So he's offering his defense. But even Ambassador Sondland in his sworn testimony didn't buy it, because ultimately then President Trump not only was not dissuaded, he again described what he wanted. He didn't want Ukraine to actually conduct these investigations. He wanted them to announce the investigations of his political rival to help him politically. He continued, and you'll hear more about that. Again, none of these excuses hold any water, and they are refuted by testimony, contemporaneous records, and more. Now, some have suggested that we should wait to proceed with these impeachment proceedings because we've not heard from all of the witnesses or obtained all the documents. But the reason we have not heard from all the witnesses or documents is because President Trump himself has obstructed the investigation. He's directed his most senior aides who are involved in some of these events not to come testify, to defy subpoenas. He has told every one of his agencies with records that could be relevant not to produce those records to us, to try to obstruct our investigation. Now, this is evidence that President Trump is replaying the playbook used in the prior Department of Justice investigation. In that investigation, he directed his White House counsel to create a false, phony record and document and lie, denying that President Trump had told him to fire the special counsel. He did many other things to try to interfere with that investigation. He attacked the investigators and witnesses and called them horrible names, just as he has done here. And President Trump thought he got away with it. On July 24th was the day that the special counsel testified before this committee and the House Intelligence Committee. The 24th. It was exactly the following day, the 25th, that President Trump spoke to President Zelensky in furtherance of his Ukrainian scheme. He thought he got away with it. Not only that, he thought he could use his powers to interfere with that investigation. So he could do what he wanted. He could act like he was above the law. And if he got caught, he would again use his powers to try to obstruct the investigation and prevent the facts from coming out. And that's exactly what he did. But fortunately, because of the true American patriots who came forward to testify despite the threats by President against the people who worked in his own administration. They told the story. They on their own produced documents that provide uncontroverted, clear, and overwhelming evidence that President Trump did this scheme. He put his political re-election over the nation's national security and the integrity of its elections. He did it intentionally. He did it corruptly. He abused his powers in ways that the founders feared the most. No person in this country has the ability to prevent investigations, and neither does the president. Our Constitution does not allow it. No one is above the law, not even the president. And one of the concerns and requirements of finding an impeachable offense is there an urgency? Is there a sense that you have to move because it could be repeated? Well, again, first, all the constitutional experts who testified recognize that obstructing an investigation is an impeachable offense. But here, the offense we're talking about that's being interfered or obstructed with is interfering with this very election that's coming up. And I submit to you, given what happened with the Department of Justice investigation, given what's happening here, if in fact President Trump can get away with what he did again, our imagination is the only limit to what President Trump may do next, or what a future president may do next, to try to abuse his or her power to serve his own personal interest over the nation's interest. I'd like to turn back to what the founders most cared about. We talk about the ABCs of potential presidential abuses. It is extraordinary that the president.
Hey, y'all.
What's a trifecta?
Born Racer, Shanahoning, People's Last Stand.
What that means.
I stepped away from it. I'm fixing to have to go to town. I'm thinking about just leaving us going. What did I miss?
In ways that are grossly inconsistent with and undermine the separation of powers that is the foundation of our democracy.
You know, I just don't understand why my block word thing is not working.
When this Congress considered the impeachment of President Nixon.
I try not to have any cussing like that in the chat, y'all.
If the president does it, it is not illegal.
But these people are crazy.
That goes directly contrary to what the founder said. But President Trump has said,
But man, y'all, I got to run. I got a phone call. I've got a job interview I've got to go do.
here's what he said.
So I don't know if I should leave this running or if I should turn it off. I mean, it was on TV, but
That he has the right to do whatever he wants.
they're not broadcasting it now.
When President Nixon said a similar thing, it is not what the Constitution provides.
What I do, man, I just got a phone call about a half hour ago. Just left town. Now I got to turn around and drive all the way back.
The American people
I need to change my head. I don't have a low beam burned out. I had to buy a $16 day gum
have been approved
light bulb.
and decided to treat it as his own check.
If I don't put it in, I'll get a ticket. Just watch. Hang on, let's see if I can get this light bulb in real quick. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm gonna leave this thing going or not. I appreciate y'all showing up. Hang on, it says we got 5 in the chat. But I'm gonna shut up for a minute.
That's what framers thought electoral pressure, particularly often foreign powers, was a critical abuse and that could support and lead to impeachment. Now, the American people learned last election how dangerous foreign intervention on elections can be. I'll show another clip from candidate Trump on the campaign trail. Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press. And Russia was listening. Within approximately 5 hours president of invitations to Russia to interfere in our election by trying to hack and obtain the emails of political opponents. Russia, in fact, tried to do that for the first time. The very officers who were then indicted by the Department of Justice for that conduct, they took candidates from invitation. Now, the American people learned the lesson. President Trump, unfortunately, is fairly learned a different lesson. Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd try to make this investigation about it. It's a very simple answer. They should investigate the Biden. So this is President Trump answering a question about what he wants the presidency to do. So even after he got caught, he is saying, again, a vulnerable nation, dependent on U.S. support militarily and otherwise. Again, he's telling them what to do. And he's when he succeeds, when he only had to get within the invitation to a foreign power. Now he has the levers of government in his control. The president and invited pressure that country to do it. And that's exactly what he did. And you'll hear more about that in the presentation for the House Intelligence Committee. And what's most striking as we come back to this issue that the framers were concerned about, is there a continuing risk of wrongdoing? The fact that President Trump did this after he was caught shows the risk. Shows the risk. What will happen if he really does believe that he does believe in that type of conduct, that he can put his personal and political interests of the nation's issues, of the nation's national security, of the nation's integrity of the world. Of course, we do have an election coming up. That's not the reason for some that. That's the reason we must make sure it's not in the future. Make sure this president doesn't do it, to make sure future presidents do not. It is the hope. It is discussion. Put aside political anger, disagreement, and have a fair discussion about the fact in this time. This relates to President Trump. And it's to the presidency itself and future presidents. Our children, our grandchildren, they will study this moment in history. They will read all of your remarks. They will learn about all of your actions. And that is not.
All right, who we still got in here?
For or against impeachment. For that, of course, you must vote your time. But that is a reason.
These people are out of their minds, man. They can't stand Trump got the vote. You still in here last time? All right, see you later, Shauna.
Where the president elected by the people can put his own personal and political interests over the interests of the people who will elect him.
This makes it echo like.
Again.
Okay, thank you very much. The IG report just came out, and I was just reading on it, and it's great what happened with the things that were done to our country. It should never again happen to another president. It's incredible, far worse than I would have ever thought. And it's an embarrassment to our country. It's dishonest. It's that a lot of people thought it would be, except far worse. So I'm going to get some very detailed briefings, but they are. It's a very sad day when I see that. Very sad day when a lot of people see that. They have known nothing, and you say what you want. That was a probably something that's never happened in the history of our country. Pam Bondi, I think we were able to look at some of the report, and can address a little bit of it very well. If you might say a few words, I'd like to ask Kellyanne. I know you looked at it also. Please.
You know, so many of us who are career law enforcement today are outraged. And I think the American people really should be terrified that this could happen to you. We're supposed to live in a society of integrity and honesty. And this happened to the president, not just to the president. You know, this should be a good day, but it's not. It's a horrible day for the country. That this could happen to the president of the United States. And they could fabricate, falsify emails, lie, and omit exculpatory evidence in order to continue this witch hunt against the president of the United States. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now we have the Durham investigation.
Kellyanne, please.
Thank you. I was the campaign manager during that time, and I would ask a simple question. Why no defensive briefing? Why not contact the Trump campaign? Why not contact candidate Trump, Governor Pence, or Governor Christie, who at the time was arranging the intelligence briefings for candidate Trump and was a public servant, government official at that time as governor of New Jersey, with a full intelligence security clearance to receive that type of information. So you can't blame people for feeling that it was unfair and that the fix was in. And to think that perhaps people lied and spied and tried to subvert democracy just because they wanted someone else to win, or just because they have a different political point of view. That is not the way the world's greatest democracy has been formed and can survive at a time such as this. I will just repeat something that Attorney General Barr said today, Mr. President, that this was an intrusive investigation of the U.S. presidential campaign on the thinnest of suspicions. And that is chilling language for any of us who want our government to work for us and not against us. I only wish they had come and informed us, Mr. President, and we could have had the knowledge and the wherewithal to act at that time and not put the taxpayers through 2+ protracted years of nonsense. Thank you, sir.
Well, they fabricated evidence and they lied to the courts, and they did all sorts of things to have it go their way. And this was something that we can never allow to happen again. The report actually, and especially when you look into it, in the details of the report, are far worse than anything I would have even imagined. What they were doing and what they would have done if I didn't make a certain move that was a very important move, because it would have been even worse if that's possible. And they might have been able to succeed. This was an overthrow of government. This was an attempted, and a lot of people.
What's going on, UFO?
And they got
Right,
caught red-handed. And I look forward to the Durham report, which is coming out in the not too distant future. Got his own information, which is this information plus. And it's an incredible thing that happened, and we're lucky we caught him. I think I'm going to put this down as one of our great achievements. Because what we found and what we saw.
Hello, Polarin.
Never, ever should this happen again in our country. With that, today we gathered to discuss the urgent national priority that we've been working on so long and so hard, expanding education freedom through school choice so that every American child can get a great education. We're grateful to be joined by Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary Betsy DeVos, Senators Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, Representative Bradley Byrne, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Pennsylvania House Speaker Mike Herzog, Tennessee State Representative John DeBarry, and students, parents, and teachers from across the nation. Some wonderful, brilliant students are with us, and we're going to be having a big session in a little while. As president, I'm fighting every day for the forgotten American. We are looking at.
All right, everybody, just heard President Donald Trump speaking on the IG report. Now we're going to take it back out to the impeachment hearing, which should be getting underway again in just moments after what was longer than a 15-minute break.
Hey guys, I gotta run to town, man, for real. Should I leave this going or should I stop it? I mean, I'm gonna be gone about an hour or hour and a half. That's how I do it, Pollard. I'm the Wilson of YouTube. All right. I've got it set up this way. Well, the way I've got it, so I'm not gonna get copywritten. I don't think I shouldn't. It's fair use. But this is live, y'all. I hate to leave and then it sends me messages. Hello, Waya. Did I pronounce that right? Waya? How you doing? Turn it. Oh man, y'all. I ain't lying, man. I just left town, got back, and they called me and said, come in for a job interview. And I'm like, I've been in town all morning. Never fails. Yeah, I wonder if I can do that now. Let me see if I can find it. I think I can add it to it while I'm tubing. I can't see the comments now, so y'all just bear with me. Hmm. Can I? I'm gonna try to edit that while I'm. It looks like I can. All right, it looks like I saved it in there. All right, I think I got it. I'm getting a little more better with this dead gum computers. Pretty sure I got it. If I better not exit out of the studio. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's kind of important, but it's not that important for me to. Oh man, while I was there, I should have made sure put this no, not for kids. Dadgummit. There we go. Okay, we're good to go now. It's not for kids and it's fair use. There's only 3 people watching and I'm one. Man, that joker there needs a daggum rope around his neck as soon as possible. And that shifty guy. Ooh.
Welcome back to order. When we recessed, we were engaging in questioning of the witnesses under the 5.
Well, look, y'all.
We will continue.
I'm gonna get out of here real quick.
Unanimous consent request before we start.
I'm gonna turn off my mic so y'all can hear this better.
Enter into the record the FISA applications and other aspects of the FBI's Crossfire hurricane. Is there a point of order? I think if we're going to keep, what do you actually have to the FISA report that just came up? Oh, we the Inspector General. We'll listen to this whole thing. We'll take that under advisement until we can review it. We'll rule it later. I mean, we'll hopefully grant it later.
I withdraw my reservation.
Mr. Sensenberger. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
It's a dog and pony show, y'all.
Two series of questions that ranking member Mr. Collins. directed at Mr. Goldman, relative to the telephone company subpoenas and the inclusion of certain information in the majority report from the Intelligence Committee.
Following, the only help I need is a hard line cable.
There are two issues.
I'm working off AT&T signal and hotspot. That's the whole problem with it. Other than that, I mean, OBS works. It's just I don't have enough bandwidth.
Congressional procedures. Where I do have a problem, and a really big problem, however, is the fact that
Jenny B's in the house.
to match
Look, y'all, I gotta run. I mean, I don't know if I should end this or keep it going.
with phone numbers.
I'll just keep it going. I'll be back in probably an hour. So y'all just listen to this crazy stuff if you want to. But I've got to run, y'all. If y'all are here when I get back, I'll see you. If not, thanks for stopping by.
And Chairman Schiff decided to man up and come here and talk rather than hiding behind Mr. Goldman as chief investigator, as his surrogate or lead, if you will. I think we could have gotten to the bottom of this, and we could have taken action to make sure that this never happens again. Now, I do not want to see members of Congress, through their subpoena power, being able to subpoena the telephone records of private citizens willy-nilly without any kind of cause, or to match the numbers up with somebody else to see who they were talking to, and then going the next step and publishing the results of that match in a report that the minority hadn't seen until it was released. That, I think, is an abuse of power. We're talking a lot about abuses of power here in the White House and in the executive branch. Here we see a clear abuse of power on the part of the people who are prosecuting against the president of the United States. They show themselves. Now, I come from the state where Joe McCarthy came from.
Did I need to call you back? I just saw that message.
When I was first getting into politics as a teenager.
Okay, I'm telling you, I have my phone on me and it's never rung or anything. It's crazy. All right. Yeah, I'm fixing to leave out here in about 5 minutes. I'll be there in like 25, 30 minutes. Okay, bye.
Whether it's you, Mr. Goldman, that authorized the matching and the publication, or whether it was Chairman Schiff. I would have loved to put Chairman Schiff under oath so that he could be required to answer the same way you have Mr. Goldman on how this all happened. It's also spent quite a bit of time curtailing the excesses of the Patriot Act, which I authored, with the Freedom Act, which I also offered. You know, the surveillance state can get out of control. This is a major step in the surveillance state getting out of control in the hands of the Congress and in the hands of a majority party that wants to influence political decisions relative to politicians, in this case, President Donald Trump, that they don't like. And they haven't liked him from the beginning of his term. They've tried to talk about impeachment since the beginning of his term. They thought that the Mueller report was going to be the smoking gun. It ended up being a cap pistol. Now they're working on this. And the steps that they have gone, the violation of common sense, the precedent that they have started, and looking at the way the chairman has conducted this hearing today and in the previous hearings, not even to allow Mr. Getz to make a point of order that he can't see what you put on the screen, I think goes against the entire fabric, of American democracy. Shame on those who've done it. And back to something objective. Maybe it's time to push the recess button. I yield back.
Chairman Adler, can I just respond quickly on the
response? Only because it's Mr. Chairman, I yielded back. No. I didn't ask him a question. I made everybody, the gentleman yielded back. Generally yielded back, Ms. Jackson Leeser.
So, Mr. Goldman, let's get to the facts again. During the phone conversation on July 25th with President Zelensky, President Trump was narrowly focusing on his own political survival, using his public office for private and political gain. The truth matters. Then we heard counsel for the Republicans say the president's concerned about foreign aid because you could kiss it goodbye, assuming that's referring to anti-corruption. But let's look at the facts of the July 25th call. I happened to have read it just recently, which sharply illustrates the president's willingness to abuse the power of his office for his own personal benefit. The memorandum of that call is on the screen in front of you, and it shows that President Trump says, and by the way, right after President Zelensky spoke about defense support and the javelins, I would like you to do us a favor, though. So, this is the president's own behavior and words. Mr. Goldman, what was that favor?
The favor was to investigate a debunked conspiracy theory related to Ukraine interference in the 2016 election. And
Mr. Goldman, the investigative committees received evidence from multiple witnesses who testified that President Trump was provided specific talking points in preparation for the July 25th call, geared toward protecting the American people's national security. Is that correct?
The talking points certainly were the part of the official U.S. policy, and they included anti-corruption efforts and national security efforts. Yes.
And those talking points were provided to help the president effectively communicate official U.S. policy interests during calls with foreign leaders. Is that right?
That is correct. It's a routine process that the National Security Council does, but the president generally is able to use them or not use them. Witnesses said the president's not required to use them. What was so startling here is that he not only veered off from them, but that he went to his own personal interests.
And it is fair to say such talking points signal the purpose of a given call, correct?
Yes.
Witnesses testified that the talking points for the July 25th call included recommendations to encourage President Zelensky to continue to promote anti-corruption reforms in Ukraine, which has a focus of American foreign policy in Eastern Europe. Is that correct?
Yes.
So to be clear, the talking points created for the president or other principals to discuss specific matters that really protect the American people. Is that accurate?
Yes, generally.
But witnesses such as Tim Morrison, the deputy assistant to the president and senior director for Europe, testified about what was not in those talking points.
Now, Mr. Morrison, were these references to CrowdStrike, the server in 2016 election, and to Vice President Biden and his son, were they included in the president's talking points? They were not.
Are you aware of any witness who testified that investigating the Bidens was an objective of official U.S. policy?
No, it was not before and it was not after this call.
And anything ever found of those investigations that might have occurred?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Anything ever found of those investigations that may have occurred with respect to the former vice president?
Every single witness said there's no factual basis for either of the investigations.
So Mr. Trump did not use official talking points?
Correct.
And there were facts to confirm that.
When you hear those words, do you hear the president requesting a thoughtful and well-calibrated anti-corruption program consistent with U.S. policy?
So, Mr. Goldman,
We were hoping, we recommended the president very clearly support what President Zelensky had run on in his own election and what his Servant of the People Party had run on in its election where it received a majority mandate.
But that didn't come up in the call, did it?
No, sir.
So, Mr. Goldman, did the evidence prove that Mr. Trump utilized his position of public trust in order to accomplish these goals, his goals, in order to hurt his domestic political opponent?
Yes, that's what the evidence showed.
I've come to understand that democracy and justice must have the vital pillars of truth, factual truth, and trust. The former judge and one who sat on this committee during impeachment in 1998, the truth matter that the president really did not really care about fighting corruption in Ukraine, but wanted his own personal interests to be considered. That kind of puts in perspective Ambassador Sondland, that they didn't care whether Ukraine actually investigated, but really whether they just announced it. It is certainly well known that it is our duty
As the president imposes a continuing to, under the Constitution, pursue the truth. That is our duty. We're now proceeding to do our duty to find the truth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a second hearing on impeachment that this committee has held in the last week. Well, I would submit that you're investigating the wrong guy. Let's look at the facts. Mr. Castor, Ukraine, that's been at the center of attention in this impeachment hearing, has historically been one of the world's most corrupt nations. Is that correct? That's correct. And under legislation that Congress passed, the National Defense Authorization Act, its responsibility, its duty, that you did not go to Ukraine unless they were making progress in reducing corruption. Is that also right? Yes, that's right. And isn't it true that Joe Biden's son, Hunter, had placed himself right smack dab in the middle of that corruption? Yes, he did. Burisma was one of the most corrupt companies in Ukraine. And contrary to what House Democrats and many in the media would have concerns about Hunter Biden's involvement in Ukrainian corruption, they're not some sort of vast right-wing conspiracy concocted by supporters of the president, are they? In fact, the concerns about Hunter Biden were first raised by the Obama administration. Is that right? That's right. And also Washington Post, a lot of publications, and the State Department. And the Obama administration's concerns about Biden didn't end there, did they? The former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, said she was coached by the Obama administration on how to answer pesky questions related to Hunter Biden and Burisma that might arise during her Senate confirmation process. Is that right? The State Department was so concerned about this, they gave her a mock Q&A on this question. And nearly every single witness who testified at the Intelligence Committee impeachment inquiry agreed that Hunter Biden's Burisma deal created, at the very least, the appearance of conflict of interest. Is that correct? That's correct. And, you know, Deputy George Kent testified that there was an investigation into Burisma, into their head, Zorchevsky, and they were trying to track down $23 million that he had taken out of the country. They were working with the United Kingdom. They were working, the United States, the United Kingdom, Ukraine was working on tracking this money down. And there was an investigation, an active investigation going on, and a bribe was paid. And that bribe was paid. It allowed Zolchevsky to get off scot-free. Right around that time is when Burisma went about sprucing up their board, shall we say. And yet, with all that evidence, the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, under Chairman, the Democrats here are determined to sweep the Biden corruption under the rug, ignore it, not let us call witnesses on it, and instead rush to impeach the president, all to satisfy, I would argue, their radical left-wing base. What a disservice to the country. Imagine this. You've got the Vice President, Joe Biden, in charge of overseeing our Ukrainian policy, and his son, Hunter Biden, receiving $50 grand a month with no identifiable expertise in either energy or yet the Democrats won't let us present witnesses. Let's do the next best thing since we can't bring the witnesses here. Let's watch a couple of videos.
You didn't have any extensive knowledge about natural gas or Ukraine itself, though. No. The list you gave me of the reasons why on not list the fact that you're the son of the. Of course. Yeah, no. What do you think that played?
I think that it is impossible for me to be on any of the boards I just mentioned without saying that I'm the son of the Vice President of the United States.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not.
You know, Joe Biden got a little testy with a voter at one of his events in Iowa last week, calling the man a liar, challenging him to a push-up convings, and falsely stating once again that nobody said there was anything wrong with his son's deal in Ukraine. Well, you know what? That's a lot of malarkey. A lot of people have been saying that for quite a while now, and they're right. And what's worse is that first the Intelligence Committee and now this committee are conducting an impeachment investigation against President Trump based on, as Professor Turley put it last week, wafer-thin evidence and ignoring evidence of a high-level U.S. official who actually did engage in a quid pro quo with the Ukrainian government. In fact, confessed to it in this video.
So I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. You're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. I think it was about 6 hours. I look at it, I'm leaving 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. You got fired.
You're investigating the wrong guy, Mr. Chairman.
Fired.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Goldman, I'd like to bring us back to the next president, not to this president, not the next president, and then stay focused on the July 25 call. The president's abuse of office for his benefit and no one else's. Now, as my colleague, Ms. Jackson Lee, confirmed, the president's request for these investigations was not an objective of U.S. foreign policy, correct?
That's right.
Is there any evidence the National Security Council wanted an investigation into the Bidens, Burisma, or any alleged Ukrainian interference in 2016?
No.
Any evidence about the State Department wanting them?
No.
How about the DOD? Did the DOD want those investigations?
No evidence of that.
Did any witness tell you that they wanted Ukraine to investigate the Bidens of the 2016 election?
No.
And we certainly know now that the Ukrainians did not want it either. In fact, they made it very clear they did not want to be an instrument, this is a quote, an instrument in Washington domestic re-election politics. So the only person who was a beneficiary from that investigation is President Trump. And that's why everyone on the July 25 call knew it was wrong. They knew it was wrong. The investigative committee heard testimony from 3 witnesses who participated in that call. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, listen.
Mr. Gold, even the witnesses who listened on that call were concerned by the call. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Mr. Morrison immediately reported the call to legal counsel. Is that right? And why did they do so?
They did. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was concerned about the substance of the call, that it was improper. Mr. Morrison was concerned about the potential political ramifications if the call was released because of the substance of the call and the political nature of the call.
And they reported the call, that they actually reported that to the internal legal channels. Mr. Goldman, I've placed Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's testimony about why he reported the call on the screen. Am I correct? His concern was based on the fact that the president was asking a foreign power to investigate a U.S. citizen.
Yes, and he was not the only witness to express that concern.
Am I also correct that he reported this concern because he thought it was a sense of duty, a duty that he felt something was wrong?
Yes, so as you probably know, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman is a Purple Heart Award winner or medal winner from Iraq, and he has been in the Department of Defense for 20 years and has a great sense of duty and a great patriotism to this country, and felt that he compelled to follow that sense of duty and report it.
And Ms. Williams, Vice President Pence's aide, was present for the call, and she testified, as you brought out, or was brought out earlier, that it was unusual and inappropriate. Is that correct?
That's right.
Now, when Mr. Vice President Biden got involved with the European Union and the IMF and Germany and France and said, you've got to do something about corruption, that was okay because they were doing something for the common good of a bunch of people, as distinguished from what's going on here, where somebody's doing it for their personal good. Is that not correct?
Right. There's a distinction between doing an official act for an official purpose and doing an official act for a personal purpose. And if I could just respond to something Mr. Castor said, when he said that there were problems because Zlochevsky had paid a bribe, the head of Burisma, in order to get out from under the prosecution, that was exactly the type of conduct that Vice President Biden wanted to shut down in Ukraine. That was exactly the type of non-anti-corruption policies that Vice President Biden was objecting to, using the official policy. So that's one of the reasons that I don't know if that was one, but that's the type of thing that he and the Americans and the Europeans.
That's the issue we've got to get in this committee, to understand the difference between doing something for the national good, for the international good, for the common good. That's the difference. Got to get that across. And those witnesses, many career nonpartisan officials, were clear they thought it was wrong to ask a foreign government to investigate a political rival. Video.
To investigate the Vice President of the United States or someone who is a U.S. official, I don't think we should be asking foreign governments to do that. I would also say that's true of a political rival. It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent.
It was improper, and it was inappropriate, and we said that in real time.
Again, our holding up of security systems would go to a country that is fighting aggression from Russia for no good policy reason, no good substantive reason, no good foreign national security reason is wrong.
And we are going to check that type of conduct. We are the people's house, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back, Mr. Gomer.
Well, I had some questions for the witness, Mr. Burke, but he has absconded. And so I'm going to use my 5 minutes, but not to ask questions. It is interesting, though, to have heard Mr. Goldman refuse to answer a question about the investigation, yet he comes in here, and the very reason that he wants to see the president for the first time any president's ever been removed from office, why he's been obstructing. He didn't answer our question. So perhaps if we're going to apply his sense of justice to him, it would be time to have him removed from his position. But that's only if we apply his own standards. And as Chris Plant said, if it weren't for double standards, some of these folks wouldn't have standards at all. But we were told also at the beginning that we would hear lawyers present evidence. Lawyers are going to come in here. Now, what normally happens, and I've been in some kangaroo hearings in courts, not my own when I was there, but I have been mistreated in hearings before, but I have never seen anything like this where we don't allow the fact witnesses to come in here. We have the lawyers come in and tell us what we're supposed to know about those witnesses and about their testimony and about their impression and what the law is. This is outrageous. My friend Jim Sensenbrenner said in 41 years, he's never seen anything like what we have going on here to try to oust a sitting president. And it's also outrageous to hear people say, well, this man thought he was a king because he said he could do anything he wanted, when they know that that statement was in the context of whether or not he could fire Mueller. And of course he could fire Mueller. He could fire or not fire Mueller. He could appoint a special prosecutor to investigate Mueller and Weissman. I think he should have. But that's his prerogative, and he could have done anything about that he wanted. To take that out of context, he thinks he's a king. Let me tell you what a king is. A king is someone who says over 20 times, I can't do that. Congress has to change the law on immigration. And then he decides, you know what? I got a pen, I got a phone, I'll do whatever I want, and by golly, he does. He makes new law with a pen and a phone. Now, that is more like a monarchy, not somebody saying they can fire a special prosecutor if they want to. And regarding treason, the Constitution itself says you got to have two witnesses. And that's not hearsay witnesses. None of the stuff that wouldn't be admissible in any decent court. No, that's two direct evidence witnesses that can come in and positively identify themselves, not something they overheard or something, but actually be witnesses to treason. And yet this group comes in there, they toss treason out in a report like it's no big deal. We can bring in a bunch of hearsay witnesses, and then we'll have the lawyers testify and then throw a president out of office. This is so absurd. It's so absurd. Now, we have a witness come in, and we're told he's going to be a witness. That's why he doesn't have to follow under the rules of decorum. And then, I've never seen this. He gets to come up and grill his opposing adversary witness. I feel like, to be fair, if we were going to make this thing fair, Mr. Chapter would be able to come up and grill Mr. Burke. But this isn't about being fair. It's not about due process. This is about a kangaroo system. And let me tell you, those that think you've done something special here, you have set the bar so low, I'm afraid it's irreparable. I mean, just think, we've had people already mention, the next president, Joe Biden, we're told, gee, he may be the next president. Well, we already got the forms. All we have to do is eliminate Donald Trump's name and put Joe Biden's name in there because he's on video. He and his son. He basically has admitted to the crime that's being hoisted on the president improperly. So I'm scared for my country because I've never seen anything like this. This is supposed to be the Congress. I came up here from a court where we had order and we had rules, and I've seen nothing of the kind in here today. And it's outrageous that we're trying to remove a president with a kangaroo court.
If I could just clarify in our report, I just want.
The gentleman yielded back. Yeah, and it is mentioned in the report we got. Thank you very much.
Gentleman yielded back. Mr. Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to get us back to the undisputed facts of the president's abuse of power. Mr. Goldman, as a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, when you prosecuted drug conspiracy cases, was it standard practice for drug kingpins to try to beat the case by distancing themselves from the conspiracy and blaming their accomplices for the crime?
All the time. Conspiracies have different layers, and the top layers make the bottom layers do the work so that they're further removed from the actual conduct.
Okay, I'd like to ask some questions about the president's role in what Ambassador Bolton referred to as a drug deal. Did the testimony and evidence compiled by the Intelligence Committee establish the fact that, with respect to Ukraine, Rudy Giuliani was at all times working on behalf of President Trump?
Yes, Mr. Giuliani said that. President Trump said that to a number of other individuals. And then those individuals, Ambassador Sondland, Ambassador Volker, also said that.
Thank you. And on May 9th, 2019, Rudy Giuliani, on behalf of his client, President Trump, spoke with a New York Times reporter about his planned trip to Ukraine. And on that trip, he planned to meet with President Zelensky, he said, and urged him to pursue investigations relating to the Bidens and to the debunked theory that Ukraine and not Russia interfered in the 2016 election. Isn't that correct?
That's right.
And Mr. Giuliani told the reporter that his trip was not about official U.S. foreign policy, and that the information he sought would be very, very helpful to his client, meaning it would be helpful to President Trump. Is that correct?
Yes, and if it's not official foreign policy, it would be helpful to President Trump's personal interests.
That's correct. And there is no doubt, Mr. Goldman, that investigations of the Bidens and the 2016 election meddling were, in fact, not about U.S. policy, but were about benefiting Trump's re-election, correct?
Yes, and even the Ukrainians realize that.
And on July 25th, President Trump placed that fateful phone call to President, and he asked President Zelensky to investigate the Bidens, correct?
Yes.
And on that call, President Trump told Zelensky, quote, "I will have Mr. Giuliani to give you a call," correct?
That's right.
And on October 2nd and October 3rd, President Trump once again made explicit that he and Mr. Giuliani were intent on making these investigations happen, correct?
Yes.
And just so you know,
And
we've been investigating on a personal basis through Rudy and others, lawyers, corruption in the 2016 election.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Biden. It's a very simple answer.
Mr. Goldman, the evidence shows a course of conduct by President Trump and his agents, does it not?
It does, and clearly it continued long after our investigation began.
It shows a common plan, correct?
That's right, yes.
It shows a common goal.
Correct.
And the goal was to get foreign help for the 2020 election, correct?
That's what all the witnesses said.
And Mr. Goldman, who was the kingpin of that plan?
President Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Ambassador Bolton called it a drug deal. As a kingpin, President Trump tried to force a foreign government to interfere in the upcoming presidential election. The evidence is undisputed and overwhelming that Rudy Giuliani acted as part of a conspiracy with President Trump to obtain Ukrainian help for President Trump in the 2020 election. This was not just a hurtful drug deal. This was an attempt to undermine the very fabric of our democracy. The framers feared most how foreign influence could turn a president into a despot. So they adopted impeachment as a backstop to protect our democracy. The facts, ladies and gentlemen, demand that we use that remedy today. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Castor, I want to go to the document that started it all, the August 12th whistleblower complaint. Bullet point 1 on page 1 of the whistleblower's complaint, he says this: over the past 4 months, more than half a dozen U.S. officials have informed me of the various facts related to this effort. Mr. Castor, who are these half a dozen U.S. officials?
We don't know.
We don't know, do we? We had no chance to know for sure who these people were because we never got to talk to the whistleblower. Is that right, Mr. Castor?
That's right.
We needed to talk to the guy who started it all. We needed to talk to him to figure out who these more than half a dozen people were who formed the basis of his complaint, and we never got to. Adam Schiff's staff got to. Adam Schiff knows who he is, but we don't get to know, and therefore we don't get to know the original people, the 6 people who formed the basis of this entire thing we've been going through now for 3 months. But we did talk to 17 people, right, Mr. Castor?
Right.
17 depositions, and you were in every single one. You were the lawyer doing the work for the Republicans in every single one. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And there's one witness who they relied on and built their report around. One witness. Who would that witness be? Because I read the report. It's obviously one witness. Who's that witness, Mr.
Ambassador Sondland.
Ambassador Sondland. I think you said earlier his name was mentioned, I don't know, what did you say?
611 times.
611 times. More than Lieutenant Colonel Denman, the guy who was on the call. More than Ambassador Taylor, their first witness, their star witness, the very first hearing in the Intelligence Committee. They relied on Sondland, not the whistleblower, not the more than half a dozen people who informed the whistleblower. They relied on Ambassador Sondland. Why did they pick Sondland, Mr. Castor?
That's probably the best they got.
Because that's the best they got. The guy who had to file an addendum to his testimony, the guy that had to file the clarification, the guy who said 2 weeks ago, sitting in the same chair you're sitting in, Mr. Castor, in his 23-page opening statement, he said this: unless President Zelensky announces an investigation into Burisma and the Bidens, there will be no call with President Trump. There'd be no meeting with President Trump. There'd be no security assistance money going to Ukraine. That's what Ambassador Sondland said. Mr. Castor, was there an announcement by President Zelensky about investigating the Bidens or Burisma?
No.
No announcement.
No.
Did President Zelensky get a call from President Trump?
Yes.
Did President Zelensky get a meeting with President Trump?
Yes.
Did President Zelensky get the money from the United States?
Yes.
They got the call on July 25th. They got the money on September 11th. They got the meeting. Is that right?
Yes.
But the guy who said no, that was going to happen is the guy they built their case around. Is that right, Mr. Sondland?
Yep.
Let me go to one other thing they built their case around. They built their case around a lot of hearsay, didn't they? And the best example of the hearsay, surprisingly enough, is Ambassador Sondland. It's amazing. They built their case around this ambassador, and they built their case around hearsay. And the best example of both is Mr. Sondland, Ambassador Sondland, because he filed his addendum, his clarification, where he says this. We read this a couple weeks ago. We put this out a couple weeks ago. He says this in bullet point number 2. In his clarification, he says Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmouk on a September 1st, 2019, in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. That's his clarification. Amazing. 6 people, as I said before, having 4 conversations in one sentence. Ambassador Taylor recalled that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmouk on September 1st, 2019, in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. That's the clarification. That's their star witness who they built their case around. So-and-so tells so-and-so what somebody said to someone else, and there you have it. That's their case. They forget the 4 key facts. They forget the fact that we have the call transcript and there was no quid pro quo. They forget the fact that 2 guys on the call, President Trump and President Zelensky, have said repeatedly there was no pressure, no linkage, no pushing. They forget the fact Ukraine didn't even know aid was held at the time of the call. And they forget the fact, most important, they did nothing to get the aid released, no announcement of any type of investigation whatsoever. They forget all that, those key facts, and they build their case around the guy who had to clarify his testimony with that amazing sentence. Mr. Goldman, did the Democrats publish phone records of the president's attorney?
Mr. Giuliani, yes.
Did the Democrats publish phone records of a member of the press?
Yes, who was also involved in
Did
it.
the Democrats publish phone records of a member of Congress?
Yes, who was talking to people.
Did the Democrats, did that member of Congress also happens to be your boss's political opponent that those phone records were published of? So the Democrats, they run this kind of investigation, ignoring the facts, not letting the whistleblower come in, and therefore not letting us know if we've talked to the more than half a dozen original sources for the whistleblower's complaint in the first place. The guy has to file an addendum with that clarification sentence. But one thing they did do in their report is they published the phone records of the president's personal lawyer, the phone records of a member of the press, and the phone records of the chairman of the Intelligence Committee's political opponent, Representative Nunes. That's what these guys did. And that's their effort to impeach the president of the United States 11 months before an election.
Gentlemen's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to focus on the facts surrounding the president's abuse of power.
Gentlemen will state unanimous consent.
I'd ask unanimous consent that the report by the majority staff of the House Committee on the Judiciary Constitutional Grounds for Presidential Impeachment, it talks about treason and bribery, be admitted for the record.
What?
Be made part of our record.
Majority report without objection. And Mr. Deitch.
Thank you. Getting back to the facts surrounding the president's abuse of power using the White House meeting as leverage for helping his political campaign. Mr. Goldman, President Trump offered Ukrainian President Zelensky a meeting in the White House. But first, he wanted investigations into the Bidens and a conspiracy theory about meddling in the 2016 election. You testified that the committee found evidence that President Trump worked to exchange official actions for personal benefit, and I want to talk about that. On May 23rd, 2019, a delegation of officials returned from Zelensky's inauguration and they briefed the president. In that briefing, President Trump directed government officials to work with his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And Trump's hand-picked Ukraine operator, Gordon Sondland, testified that they faced a choice: either work with Giuliani or abandon the goal of a White House meeting. What choice did they make, Mr. Goldman?
They decided to work with Mr. Giuliani.
Right. And 6 days later, on May 29th, President Trump sent the new Ukrainian president a letter that said America stood with Ukraine and invited President Zelensky to visit the White House. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the second time that he invited him to the White House.
So at this point, the Ukrainian president expected that meeting.
Correct.
But then they learned that they've got to do something more for the president. Someone testified that there was a prerequisite of investigations. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And NSC staffer Lieutenant Colonel Vivian testified that Sondland told the Ukrainians in a July 10th meeting that investigation of the Bidens was a deliverable necessary to get that meeting. Isn't that right?
Yes, and if I could just take a second to correct what Mr. Castor said about that meeting, there really is no inconsistent statements about whether or not Ambassador Sondland raised the issue of investigations in connection to the White House. Even Ambassador Volker, in his public testimony, was forced to admit that he did hear that, and he said it was inappropriate.
And in fact, on July 19th, Sondland told President Zelensky directly that President Trump wanted to hear a commitment to the investigations on the July 25th call, correct?
That's right.
And that same day, Sondland updated multiple Trump administration officials that Zelensky was, quote, prepared to receive POTUS's call and would offer assurances about the investigations. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And on that same day, State Department official Volker had breakfast with Rudy Giuliani, and he reported to Sondland by text message. Most important is for Zelensky to say he will help investigation, right?
Yes, and address any specific personnel issues.
Right. And later that day, after Giuliani spoke with Yermak, evidence suggests that Giuliani gave a green light to that July 25th call. Then on the morning of the call, Volker texted Zelensky a Yermak, and that text
to his aide said, and I quote, heard from White House, assuming President Z convinces Trump he will investigate, get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, we will nail down a date for visit to Washington. And the transcript released by President Trump shows Trump requests investigations and Zelensky agrees. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and that text message was actually a direction, a message relayed from President Trump himself.
And then after the July 25th call, members of the administration continued to follow up with the Ukrainian counterparts to prepare for the announcement of investigations. Sondland texted Volker about efforts to schedule a White House visit, noting that POTUS really wants the deliverable. And that was just one of many messages. During a flurry of follow-up activity, there were meetings and calls and texts on July 26th and July 27th and August 2nd, 4th, 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, August 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 15th. Mr. Goldman, August 16th, 17th, and August 19th. Isn't that correct?
Yes, including to Secretary Pompeo as well.
Here's the point. These are our government officials who work for us. Instead, they were working hard to help the president advance his personal political interests. Isn't that what you found, Mr. Goldman?
That's right.
This isn't a close call. We had a Ukrainian president at war with Russia, desperate for a White House meeting. The president promised a White House meeting, but then he blocked the Oval Office. He blocked it and said, I need a favor to help America, a favor to help me get reelected. Our framers feared one day we would face a moment like they gave us an impeachment, and they gave us impeachment as a safety valve, not to punish the president, but to defend our elections and our Constitution, and that's what we must do.
The gentleman yields back, Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Castor, I want to direct your attention to page 3 of the telephone call dated July 25th between President Trump and President Zelensky. On page 3, President Trump states, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. Later, he says, I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. The majority report on page 13 says, the U.S. intelligence community had unanimously determined that Russia, not Ukraine, interfered in the 2016 election to help the candidacy of President Trump. Mr. Castor, there appears to be a conflict there. President Trump is asking the Ukraine to investigate something. The majority has decided that it's an illegitimate request because there was no interference in an election by the Ukraine. Is that how you read this?
Yes.
And the press release from the majority on their report says, as part of this scheme, President Trump, acting in his official capacity and using his position of public trust, personally and directly requested that the president of Ukraine, that the government of Ukraine publicly announce investigations into subsection 2, a baseless theory promoted by Russia alleging that Ukraine, rather than Russia, interfered in the 2016 U.S. election. Is that true?
Yes.
And Mr. Castor, I want to ask you something. Have you seen this article from Politico dated January 11, 2017?
Yes, I have.
And the title of that article is Ukrainian Efforts to Sabotage Trump Backfire. Is that correct?
Yes.
I want to read you the second paragraph. Ukrainian government officials tried to help Hillary Clinton and undermine Trump by publicly questioning his fitness for office. They also disseminated documents implicating a top Trump aide in corruption and suggested they were investigating the matter only to back away after the election. And they helped Clinton's allies research damaging information on Trump and his advisors, a Politico investigation found. Isn't it true that President Trump had a legitimate reason to request help from the Ukraine about the 2016 election? And I'm not suggesting for a minute that Russia didn't interfere. Of course they interfered. But the Ukraine officials tried to influence the election. Yes. Let's move on to Ambassador Sondland. I
only have 10 fingers and 10 toes. I can't count above 20, Mr. Castor. Did you know how many times Ambassador Sondland said that he did not know, did not recall, had no recollection, had limited memory, or failed to remember something in his October 17th testimony? You know how many times? 325. Does that surprise you? 325. Big number. And then he files a clarifying statement, and he clarifies a few things, I guess. But did you have any contact with Ambassador Sondland between the time of his deposition and the time of his clarifying statement? No. The majority? I have no idea. You have no idea. So they may have had influence on his testimony. And that would be evidence of bias. That would be evidence of credibility. That would be evidence that we should take into account before. But we'll never know, will we? Because the majority counsel has a right to assert privilege as to information that's relevant. The majority counsel has a right to assert a privilege in any communications he has with the chairman, Adam Schiff, doesn't he? As does minority counsel. That's a privilege that we reserve here in Congress, isn't it? And the same thing is true with FOIA. The Freedom of Information Act does not apply to memos that majority counsel writes. Isn't that true? So we've demanded that of the executive branch, but we've allowed ourselves not to be part of FOIA. Correct? Correct. Okay, so the majority has a privilege. The president also has a privilege. It's called executive privilege. He can meet with the Secretary of State, and that's a privileged conversation. He can meet with the Secretary of Defense. That's a privileged conversation. He can meet with the Secretary of Energy. That's a privileged conversation. Now, when the majority has subpoenaed those witnesses, and the president has refused to produce those witnesses or relevant documents, or what they consider relevant documents, they are charging him with an article of impeachment for obstruction. In fact, their report says President obstructed the impeachment by instructing witnesses to ignore why. It's back.
Mr. Goldman, I want to pick up on the president using the powers of his office, meeting at the White House, to pressure a foreign country to investigate his political rival. Now that you've had time to step back from the investigation, is there any doubt that the president did, in fact, use a White House visit to pressure President Zelensky to announce investigations of his political rival to benefit his re-election campaign?
I will answer that question in a minute, but I would like just to comment to Mr. Buck that the majority staff and no one had any contact with Ambassador Sondland after his deposition. But the answer to your question is yes, Ms. Bass.
My colleague, Mr. Deutsch, mostly focused on the period prior to the July 25th call. I'd like to focus on the period after. Following the call, did President Zelensky come to the White House for a meeting?
No, he's never come to the White House, and multiple witnesses said that there's a huge distinction between a White House meeting and a meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly where they did meet on September 25th.
So has the White House meeting been scheduled?
No.
So did the president and his associates essentially continue to withhold the White House meeting? And if so, why did they do that?
Well, the evidence found that the White House meeting was conditioned on the announcement of these investigations. And so once in mid-August, when the Ukrainians, Mr. Yermak and President Zelensky, decided that they were not going to issue that statement that Rudy Giuliani wanted to include Burisma in the 2016 elections, there was no White House meeting. It soon became clear to them that the security assistance was also at risk, and that took on a renewed importance for them.
Well, following the 25th call, the July 25th call, Ambassador Sondland and Volker worked closely with Mr. Giuliani and the Ukrainians to help draft a statement that the president could meet with President Zelensky. Wasn't that right?
Yes, and the report states they worked closely, and then there were also phone calls with the White House around the same time that they were working closely.
Do you know what that statement was supposed to say, according to Mr. Giuliani and the U.S. officials?
Well, the key difference is that it had to include that Ukraine would do the investigations of Burisma, which equals the Biden investigation, and the 2016 Ukraine interference.
Well, was there concern about doing the investigations, or what? Were they just supposed to make a statement about it? What?
Ambassador Sondland very clearly testified that all he ever heard Mr. Julian say is that they only needed the public announcement of the investigation.
And so did the committee fuck that public statement that there would be no White House meeting?
Yes.
So clear the evidence seems to be on this point, and I'd like to play another example.
Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes. Everyone was in the loop.
Mr. Goldman, did the investigative committees find that Mr. Giuliani played a role in the White House visit being conditioned on investigations?
The evidence showed that Mr. Giuliani not only played a role, but that he was essentially the president's agent. He was acting on behalf of the president, expressing the president's wishes, desires.
So what evidence did the committee find that corroborated the quote, everyone was in the loop?
Well, Ambassador Sondland produced for his public testimony, and I think it's very important in light of the testimony from Mr. Castor a minute ago with Mr. Buck as to how many times that Mr. Sondland did not remember in his deposition, because we agree it was egregious. But the advantage of doing closed depositions is that Mr. Sondland could not match up his testimony. So as other witnesses came in, then he realized that he had to actually admit more and more stuff. So he did admit to an email that included Secretary Pompeo.
I do want to make a point before my time goes out. We have to think about what is going on today. So President Zelensky is meeting with Putin today. And because of President Trump's actions, Zelensky is in a weakened position to negotiate with the leader of the nation that invaded his country. If our military assistance had been provided as Congress ordered it and the White House meeting, President Zelensky would be meeting with Putin from a position of strength. If you want the support, well, we have to realize that the message of this sends to our allies is to end this our standing in the world. If you want the support of the United States, be prepared to help with President Trump's reelection. President Trump's abuse of power has injured our nation.
Thank you, Chairman. The 299-page Democratic majority report mentions the Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson on pages 26, 33, 138, 140, and 143. Mr. Bowman, you were present for the October 4, 2019 transcribed interview of the Inspector General Michael Atkinson, correct? Yes. On pages 53 to 73 of that transcribed interview, his testimony confirms the following. The whistleblower made statements to the Inspector General under penalty of perjury that were not true and correct. That the whistleblower first made statements in writing under penalty of perjury that were not true and correct. The whistleblower then made statements under penalty of perjury that were not true and correct in his or her verbal responses to the Inspector General's investigative team. Because of the whistleblower statements in writing and verbally to the Inspector General that were neither true or accurate, pages 53 to 73 of that sworn testimony revealed that the Inspector General was not able to answer any questions, none from me, about the whistleblower's contact or communication with Chairman Schiff's staff, of which Mr. Goldman is a member. Mr. Castor, do you remember anywhere in this 299-page report that makes reference to the fact that when the whistleblower started this inquiry, he or she did so by making statements under penalty of perjury that were neither true or correct in writing, and then did so again verbally? After the Inspector General testified on October 4th, and after media reports revealed that the whistleblower and Chairman Schiff did not disclose their prior contacts or communications with one another, the whistleblower contacted the Inspector General to explain why he or she made statements under penalty of perjury in writing and verbally that were not true, correct, and accurate. Mr. Castor, is that communication from the whistleblower to the Inspector General to explain prior inconsistent statements reflected anywhere in the 299-page report? On October 2nd, Chairman Schiff's spokesman, Patrick Boland, acknowledged publicly that that the outlines of the whistleblower's accusations against the president had been disclosed to the House Intelligence staff and shared with the chairmanship. Mr. Castor, that disclosure and Mr. Boland's admission of that disclosure anywhere in this report?
I don't remember seeing it.
It's not. I think all members of Congress should be held accountable during this impeachment process. And to that end, if I have made any false statements about the whistleblower or the Inspector General's testimony today, then I should be held accountable. The way to do that would be to release the Inspector General's testimony, or even just pages 53 to 73. I would add that there's nothing in those pages that would in any way identify or place at risk the whistleblower's identity, nor would it reveal any information that in any way relates to, much less jeopardizes national security. Look, maybe there's a believable explanation for why the whistleblower made statements that weren't true or accurate about his contact or her contact with chairmanship in writing and then again verbally. Maybe there's a good explanation for why the words Congress or congressional committee was confusing or not clear to the whistleblower. Maybe there's a good explanation for why the whistleblower also misled the Inspector General in writing on August 12th by stating, I reserve the option to exercise my legal right to contact the committees directly, when the whistleblower had in fact already contacted chairmanship's committee 2 weeks before he or she wrote that. Maybe there's a believable reason why chairmanship was not initially truthful about his staff's communications with the whistleblower. Maybe there's a good reason that explains all of these statements in writing and verbally that just weren't true and correct. Maybe there is, but there is no good reason for voting to impeach and remove from office an American president without allowing a single question to be asked of a single witness to get an explanation for why the Inspector General was not told the truth about contacts between the whistleblower and chairmanship. The bottom line is we should all be held accountable, and next November, every member of the House will be asked this question: did you vote to impeach the president without allowing any investigation into why the whistleblower that started it all did so by making statements in writing and verbally under penalty of perjury that were not true? Democrats may not care if that question ever gets answered, but the voters will. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Goldman, I want to start off with facts and that you all uncovered through the course of your investigation. I want to pick up where my colleagues, Mr. Deutsch and Ms. Bass, left off. They walked us through how the president used the White House visit to apply pressure on Ukraine to do his personal bidding. I want to talk about how the president did the same thing with almost $400 million taxpayer dollars to pressure Ukraine to do his personal bidding. So I'd like to start with turning back to the July 25th call. It's a fact that in the president's own words in the transcript submitted by him, reveals that after Ukraine asked for military aid, Trump says, I would like you to do us a favor, though.
Right after President Zelensky thanks President Trump for the military assistance, then President Trump asked for a favor. And of course, by this point, President Trump had already placed the hold on the security assistance.
Now, my Republican colleagues have suggested that the Ukrainians did not even know about the military aid being withheld. Is that true?
No, there was significant evidence that even as early as July 25th, by the time of this call, that Ukrainian officials had suspected that the aid was being withheld. And there was a New York Times article actually last week that wasn't included in our report, but from the former deputy foreign minister, who said that Ukraine, President Zelensky's office received a diplomatic cable from the embassy here the week of July 25th, saying that the aid had been held.
Correct. And what I also show you on the screen is that it was on July 25th also, the same day of the call, that the State Department emailed the Department of Defense noting that the Ukrainian embassy was asking about the withheld military aid.
Yes, that's what I was referring to.
Let's go back. There was also discussion earlier during the minority questioning
that Mr. Sandy from OMB said that the reason for the security assistance hold was related to the president's concerns about burden sharing with Europe. Is that consistent with the evidence that you all uncovered?
So it's a good question because Mr. Sandy did say that, but notably, Mr. Sandy said that he only heard that in early September, that reason was never provided to him or anybody else before early September for the first 2 months of the hold. And of course, it was given at that point as the gig was up, so to speak.
So that was after everything came out to light.
He wasn't sure of the timing, but he was ultimately told that the reason for the hold after it was lifted was for that reason. But that's, I think an after the fact excuse based on our evidence because no other witnesses were ever told of that reason during the entire time that it was held.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record evidence uncovered by the committee from the House Budget and Appropriations Committees that documents OMB placing a hold on the Ukrainian security assistance on July 25th. Without objection. So let's review. On July 18th, OMB announced to all relevant agencies that the military aid would be withheld from Ukraine. On a call with Ukraine on July 25th, President Trump says, do us a favor, though, and ask Ukraine to investigate his political rival. Also on July 25th, in the hours following that call, both the Ukrainians and Americans took action specifically related to that military aid. The Ukrainians began asking about the status of their military aid, and OMB took its first official action to withhold that aid. Mr. Goldman, I'm placing on the screen in front of you an email from Ambassador Sondland to members of the White House administration, in which Ambassador Sondland says, I would ask Zelensky to look him in the eye and tell him that once Ukraine's new justice folks are in place, Zelensky should be able to move forward publicly and with confidence on those issues of importance to the president and the United States. Hopefully, that will break the log jam. Did the investigative committees uncover any evidence on what Ambassador Sondland meant when he suggested that President Zelensky would have to move forward publicly on, quote, issues of importance to the president to receive military aid?
Ambassador Sondland said those were the two investigations that President Trump mentioned on the July 25th call, which Secretary Pompeo, who received that email, listened into.
So the president was concerned about the two investigations, and though that was the predicate for releasing military aid to our ally.
At the time of that email, yes.
Thank you, and I yield back.
A little earlier, Mr. Armstrong had asked a unanimous consent request to insert into the record the IG report released today about FISA, and I had said we would take it under advisement. We have reviewed it, and without objection, it will be entered into the record. Ms. Roby.
I'm actually stunned by the process or lack thereof that is taking place in this institution. I have many Democratic friends that I know to be thoughtful, deliberative members of Congress, even though we may disagree vehemently on policy. That these proceedings being led by the majority, like I said, it's stunning. I cannot for the life of me figure out why the majority would approach this in such a way that will forever cast doubt on why and how they chose to affect history with the impeachment of a president of the United States. And now to what has taken place here today. This is just bizarre. As a member of Congress serving on the House Judiciary Committee, I'm asking questions to staff as witnesses before us in an impeachment evidentiary hearing. I mean, no disrespect to staff. We have the most dedicated, hardworking staff, and without these individuals, we most certainly couldn't do our jobs effectively. But we have not, and we will not hear from any citizens. Whether you identify as a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, whether you agree or disagree with the president, whether you like or dislike a president, the American people should feel cheated by the way this is all taking place. This process is more than incomplete, and the American people should know that. Today, history is being made, and I too believe it is a dangerous precedent for the future of our republic. It is worth a deeper explanation of the issue of a minority hearing. The minority members of this committee have frequently asked the chairman for a minority day hearing, and all members.
Oh, there's somebody still here.
To a letter to the chairman asking for a minority day hearing.
There's somebody still here. Check this out.
Rule 11, Clause 2. Whenever a hearing is conducted by a committee on a measure or a matter, the minority members of the committee shall be
Kelly Cabo.
upon the request to the chair by a majority of them for the completion of the hearing to call witnesses
I'll be
selected
right
by the
back.
minority to testify with respect to that measure or matter of day of hearing thereon. The wording here is that the minority shall be entitled, not if the chairman deems the minority worthy, but shall be entitled. Mr. Castor, with all of your experience in investigations here in the Congress, is it your belief, based on that experience, that ignoring the minority's stated rights for a hearing under the rules of the House severely undermines the future of this institution?
Yes.
I'd like to quote what we heard from the Democratic staff, Mr. Burke, in his opening comments. It is the hope that in these discussions, we can put aside political rancor, disagreements, and have a fair discussion. That is far from what is happening here today or the days leading up to this. The American people deserve better than this. I yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Collins.
Thank you. Mr. Castor, we've heard a lot. This is always a good time, I think, to go back and remind people that there are 4 things that really haven't changed. Would you like to at least remind us of everything that's been discussed?
Things that will never change, and that is the transcript is complete and accurate. It shows no quid pro quo, no conditionality. That's number 1. Number 2, there's no pressure. Both Zelensky and Trump have said that repeatedly. President Zelensky said that at the United Nations on September 25th. He said it in subsequent news articles on October 6th, October 10th, and December 1st. Number 3, the Ukrainians and Zelensky.
Who we got in here?
Pausing aid at the very least at the time of the call. And number 4.
All right, y'all. I'll make it back in there.
The aid was released, and the White House, afforded a meeting.
We got the job. Woo-hoo. What did I miss? Well, they think we do last time. If you're still in here, Kelly Cabo. I don't know if you're still here. Is this chat moving?
Aid to Ukraine. Mr. Goldman, Congress allocated on a bipartisan basis $391 million in military aid to the Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yes, and it was signed by President Trump into law.
Does the record establish that the military aid to Ukraine is in the national security interests of the United States?
Absolutely.
The investigation concluded that President Trump compromised U.S. national security by withholding vital military assistance and diplomatic support. Is that true?
Yes.
President Trump and his defenders claim that he withheld military aid out of alleged with corruption in Ukraine. Let's explore this phony justification. Donald Trump first spoke to the president of Ukraine on an April 21st call, correct?
That's right.
President Trump never used the word corruption on that April 21st.
That is true. And the readout from the White House after the call did say that President Trump talked about corruption.
That readout was inaccurate. In a May 23rd letter, Trump's Department of Defense concluded that Ukraine met the anti-corruption benchmarks required to receive military aid from the United States. True?
Yes. And if I could just take a second to talk about that, because that's very important. And this goes back to what I was talking about with Vice President Biden. There is absolutely conditionality on aid routinely in all sorts of different ways, but it's done through official policy. And these anti-corruption benchmarks that you're referencing here was a condition of Ukraine getting the aid. But in May, the Department of Defense, in conjunction with the other interagencies, certified that Ukraine was making the necessary progress on anti-corruption efforts to merit the aid.
And yet the aid was not released, correct?
It was supposed to be released. DOD announced the release, and then President Trump released the aid without explanation.
Mr. Goldman, based on the evidence testimony that you have reviewed, is there any reason the president cared about corruption?
No, the evidence really supports the fact that President Trump views corruption in Ukraine to be synonymous with the two investigations that he wants.
What the president did care about was a political favor from the Ukrainian government, and that is why he withheld the military aid. True?
That he told Ambassador Sondland himself that that is the only thing that he cares about.
Now, several witnesses testified as to the real motivation connected to the withheld military aid, including Ambassador Bill Taylor. Here is what he said in his testimony.
To withhold that assistance for no good reason other than help with the political campaign made no sense. It was counterproductive to all of what we had been trying to do. It was illogical. It could not be explained. It was crazy.
Illogical, unexplainable, crazy. Mr. Goldman, to testimony from Ambassador Taylor, the nation of withheld aid that made sense is that the president was seeking help with a political campaign, correct?
That logical explanation, as multiple witnesses said.
Ambassador Sondland is a Trump appointee who gave $1 million.
Hey, sweet Serenity.
To the president's inauguration. And he
Glad to see you, my twin sister.
would not occur until there was a public statement.
Oh, I don't either, but I know what they're doing is I just want to see all these lies, and then I want to watch them get busted out of them.
Is a decorated Iraq War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and member of the White House National Security Council.
Oh, I just think it's funny. I've been putting my own banners up. Vote for me, John Boy for president.
Yeah, that was the pretty much unanimous view of all.
When we're gonna do an interview, I need to get you on a panel once sometime.
Before the Intelligence Committee.
We're fixing to get a snowstorm here. I'm gonna turn that down. We're fixing to get a snowstorm here. It's supposed to get up to like 4 inches. But thanks for stopping by. I mean, I was just doing this to do it, to at least have, you know, some record of this crazy stuff they're doing. It's just ridiculous, man. These people feel like he did something wrong. They're mad because he became president and Hillary didn't. And it's like watching a spoiled child throw a temper tantrum. The Democrats, they're going to be messed up when they go to the Supreme Court where they use real law, because they made up all this stuff. It's just crazy. I'm not political, I really don't. But this is kind of, I mean, this is a once in a lifetime. They're trying to overthrow the United States government is basically what's going on. And I feel like, man, I ought to watch this. This is history right here, man. I want to see them all hanging from the White House porch. I'm going to turn my mic off so I don't interfere.
You hear nonpartisan investigator of the facts.
I'm here to present the report that we did on our investigation, which was totally and completely reliant on the actual uncovered, the witness testimony and the documents.
Are you a partisan?
I'm not a partisan.
Mr. Castro, how long have you worked for the House? Since 2005. And same question, Mr. Goldman.
For the House? Since earlier this year.
Mr. Castro, do you make political donations? I don't remember any. Mr. Goldman, same question. Do you make political donations?
I do, sir. I think it's very important.
Matter of fact, you've given tens of thousands of dollars to Democrats, right?
Sir, I think it's very important to support candidates for office. I think our
Have you given over 100,000?
Do you mind if
I just want to know the number. I don't really care the basis. Have you given more than 100,000?
You don't care about it?
The basis. I just want the number. So it's tens. I think
I don't know the number.
Do you know how much money Mr. Burke has given Democrats?
I don't know, and I don't.
Would it surprise you if it's more than 100,000?
Mr. Gates, I'm here to talk about this report.
So you gave tens of thousands, and Mr. Burke gave hundreds of, or more than 100,000. Do you think if you'd given more money, you might have been able to ask questions and answer them like Mr. Burke did? I guess it's something you're still pondering. Mr. Castor, have you ever tweeted anything at the president?
No.
Mr. Goldman, same question.
I have made a number of tweets in my private capacity before I came to this job when I was working in the media, yes.
Matter of fact, this is one of those tweets, right? And you said, nothing in the dossier is proven false, but in fact, the dossier said that there was a Russian consulate in Miami when there isn't. The dossier said that Michael Cohen had a meeting in Prague when he didn't. The dossier said that Michael Cohen's wife was Russian. She's in fact Ukrainian. And so as we sit here today, where you, I guess, got a tweet mentioning a P-tape, presenting yourself not as a partisan, hired by the Democrats to pursue the president, do you regret this tweet?
Sir, I would be happy to put this investigation up with any of the nonpartisan investigators.
I just want to know if you regret the tweet, Mr. Goldman.
During my 10 years as a federal prosecutor.
Do you regret it?
I hope you read the evidence, and I think you can judge.
You either regret it or you don't regret it. I guess you don't want to answer the question. You know what, Mr. Chairman? Earlier in the hearing, in your opening statement, that there is nothing more urgent than impeachment right now. This is the most urgent thing we could possibly do. Well, you know what? If you're a senior right now and you can't afford your prescription drugs, that's more urgent than this. If you're a manufacturer wanting to dominate the Western Hemisphere with the passage of the USMCA, that is more urgent. If you're a farmer who wants to open markets so that your family can survive and thrive, that is a lot more urgent than this partisan process. If you're a desperate family member watching someone succumb to addiction, solving the opioid problem, probably more urgent than this partisan impeachment. If you're a member of the next generation, dealing with the challenges of exchange, a budget that's out of control, driving up the credit card of young people in this country and what they'll have to pay back as a consequence of our poor decisions, likely more urgent. But House Democrats have failed at all of these things. Matter of fact, I'd say the only thing under the Christmas tree for most Americans would be a lump of coal, but I think they're against coal too. The only thing under the Christmas tree for Americans would be impeachment and investigations. I've heard over and over Democrats say that this is all about the president's personal interest and that he abandoned the national interest. And it begs an analysis of how the nation is doing. In 66,000 jobs created, 80,000 over the average, 500,000 more manufacturing jobs in the Trump presidency, 700,000 construction jobs. We are doing better than ever before. The American people are thriving. Why won't you help us move along the critical issues that are far more important than your partisan impeachment?
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Cicilline.
Let me begin by dispelling the claim that Mr. Gates just made. This has been one of the most productive Congresses in modern history. We've passed nearly 400 pieces of legislation that respond to the urgent priorities of the American people, driving down healthcare costs, raising wages for the American worker, responding to gun violence, providing equal pay for equal work, responding to the climate crisis. 275 of those bills are fully bipartisan, and 80% of those bills are sitting on the Senate Majority Leader's desk awaiting action. So we will continue to deliver on the important priorities of the American people, but we were also elected to hold this president accountable. And we took an oath that said to protect and defend the Constitution we're engaged in today. And so I want to return, Mr. Goldman, to the military aid. Did the investigating committees receive evidence about why the United States military aid to Ukraine was necessary? What was it advancing? Because a lot of Americans who are watching don't know a lot about Ukraine, don't know about the geopolitical significance. Like, why does it matter?
The witnesses were quite clear about this, and they say it mattered for multiple reasons. The first is that Russia invaded Ukraine to take over part of their country, and that this was the first military incursion in Europe since World War II. And this is Russia, who's an adversary, actually trying to encroach on another democracy. So just from a democratic view, it was essential not only to create national security, but to American national security to make sure that democracy remains worldwide.
And when that, prior to the call on July 25th, Congress had, correct?
Congress had approved the aid, and then the president had
And the department had even publicly announced its intention to deliver the aid, correct?
That's right.
The Trump administration had already certified that Ukraine had taken substantial steps to combat corruption, correct?
Correct.
And that normally leads to the release of the aid.
It announced the release of the aid, yes.
And the investigative committees questioned witnesses from the Defense Department, the State Department, OMB, the White House, and the National Security Council about the president's decision to withhold aid, correct?
Correct.
And I'd like to play a clip of some of that evidence.
From what you witnessed, did anybody in the national security community support withholding the assistance?
No.
I never heard anyone advocate for holding the aid.
And the entire interagency supported the continuation of the security assistance, isn't that right? That is correct.
I and others sat in astonishment. Ukrainians were fighting Russians and counted on not only the training and weapons, but also the assurance of U.S. support.
Am I correct that the witnesses that appeared before your committee confirmed that there was no credible explanation for withholding the military aid and that it was in fact against our national security interest to do so?
Everyone agreed it was against our national security interest to do so. The only explanation that any witness provided was Mr. Sandy, who said that he heard from Rob Blair, I believe, the assistant to Mick Mulvaney, that of other countries' donations or contributions to Ukraine, but that was only in September, and of course there were no further commitments from any other country.
And as we heard from Bill Taylor, who was a decorated combat veteran who served in Vietnam, Ukraine then and now is in an active war with the Russians. Russia stole part of their country and killed more than 10,000. Weakening Ukraine would only benefit Russia. Here's what Ambassador Taylor said.
After our meeting, Ambassador Volker and I traveled to the front line in northern Donbass to receive a briefing from the commander of forces on the line of contact. Arriving for the briefing in the military headquarters, the commander thanked us for the security assistance. But I was aware that this assistance was on hold. Hostile Russian-led forces on the other side of the damaged bridge across the line of contact. Russian-led forces continue to kill Ukrainians in the war, 1 or 2 a week. More Ukrainians would undoubtedly die without the U.S.
Against the consensus of his own agencies and national security experts, the president used congressionally appropriated funds to advance his own political international security. This action is a threat to the integrity of our elections and the sanctity of our democracy. President Trump must not get away with this. No one in this country, no one, including the President of the United States, is above the law.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a truly extraordinary and historically unprecedented hearing. It has frankly been an outrageous violation of due process, a series of violations of due process. In fact, let me review the past 7.5 hours. And today, I asked Chairman Nadler if Mr. Burke was appearing here as a staff member or as a witness. But the chairman gave strangely conflicting answers to that important question. When I objected under House Rule 17, that Mr. Burke was repeatedly and brazenly steamrolling over House decorum rules and using language that impugned the motives of the President of the United States and suggested he is disloyal to his country, Chairman Nadler insisted that those words could not be taken down and stricken from the record, saying, quote, "The rules don't apply here because Mr. Burke is merely appearing as a staffer." But later, Chairman Nadler stated the opposite and declared that Mr. Burke was appearing to present the Democrat member's report as their representative, which would, of course, mean that the member rules should apply. Then Mr. Burke was allowed to switch places and turn from witness to questioner. That's extraordinarily bizarre, of course, but it's entirely consistent with this whole impeachment circus. Until Chairman Adam Schiff was allowed in the opening act of this circus to serve as the judge, jury, prosecutor, and case strategy chief all in one. So much for due process. The Democrats have
special parameters for these special hearings, House Resolution 660. Mr. Burke was then allowed to members of Congress on this dais and asked 45 minutes of questions of his fellow witness, Mr. Castor. When he was argumentative, assumed critical facts not in evidence, engaged in speculation, and committed countless other violations of regular House rules and the federal rules of civil procedure, I objected, was then ruled out of order. Informed all of us that while House Resolution 660 specifically provides for objections, it lists none of them, and the Democrats have ignored every request of ours to obtain a list of what would be enforced and applicable today. Again, so much for due process and fairness. A month ago, the Republican members of this committee formally requested all done impeachment investigation, but Chairman Nadler and Schiff withheld everything until, you know when? Saturday afternoon. That's right, less than 48 hours before this hearing, they dumped approximately 8,000 pages of documentation home in our districts. They intentionally made it literally impossible for us to review all material in any meaningful way, mere hours before this fateful hearing. What's worse is that the documents they decided to dump on us are not all of the underlying records we need to review, but rather only a partial, redacted, and biased subset of information that they think will advance their false narrative. And as has been mentioned here, we're being allowed no minority day hearing, which is required by regular House rules. Now, I'd love to cross-examine Mr. Burke himself, but Chairman Nadler's special and still mysterious rules for this hearing won't allow it. I notice he's disappeared from the hearing room. I would love to ask him under oath about his own biases. Because, you know, he hammered here over and over today the importance of fairness and objectivity and accuracy, and he insisted that everything here has to be unbiased. But if he was under oath here, he would be forced to admit that FEC records show that he has personally donated approximately $99,000 to the Democrat candidates over the years, including sizable donations to Hillary Clinton for president, and also donated to past Trump opponents, including Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Kirsten Gillibrand. Mr. Burke appeared here as a fact witness and a finder of fact, but in our system, a finder of fact is supposed to be fair and impartial. He's supposed to be an umpire. The problem with all this, and the problem that everybody at home can see with their own eyes, is that the umpires in this high-stakes game are parading around the field in the majority team's jerseys. The report of evidence released by our Republican committee staff on December 2nd carefully documents that in the hearings that led us to this point today, Chairman Schiff directed witnesses called by the Democrats not to answer Republican questions. He rejected witnesses identified Republicans who would have injected some semblance of fairness and objectivity, and he denied Republican subpoenas for testimony and documents, violating the Democrats' own rules to vote down those subpoenas with no notice to Republicans. Chairman Schiff also publicly fabricated evidence about President Trump's July 25th phone call, and he misled the American public about his interactions with the anonymous whistleblower to selectively seek information to paint misleading public narratives. The anonymous whistleblower reportedly acknowledged having a professional relationship with Vice President Biden, and obviously his motives, biases, and credibility are essential to this case, but we can't question it. This is not due process. This is not the rule of law, and this is not how to impeach an American president, and this is not how we're supposed to run a country. It can't be. 17 out of 24 of our colleagues over there already voted to proceed with impeachments before we started all this. They've already made up their minds. They were prejudiced before we walked in, but the American people still matters, truth matters, and the people can see clearly. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Swalwell.
Mr. Goldman, would you welcome the problem of having 8,000 documents given to you from the White House?
It would be a wonderful problem to have.
How many have they given you?
0.
Mr. Castor, you said earlier that they got the aid. They got the aid. No harm, no foul. They got the aid. You would agree that although Mr. Sandy said that the presidential concern was European contributions, nothing changed from when that concern was expressed to when they actually got the aid, right? Europe didn't new money.
Oh, but they did a study. I mean,
a study. That we have most recently that take a while. How many times has President Trump met with Vladimir Putin or talked to him? It's 16. Okay. How many times has President the White House, President Zelensky? It's zero. Who is President Trump meeting with at the White House tomorrow? Do you know?
I'm not.
It's Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. Okay. Now, Mr. Goldman, with it obviously hurts Ukraine. It hurts the United States.
The witnesses said that that would help Russia.
Did you also hear testimony that these, while being wrong and an abuse of power, also harmed U.S. national security?
Yes.
Did you hear anything about how it would harm our credibility? And I would turn you to a conversation Ambassador Volker had on September 14 of this year with a senior Ukrainian official, where Ambassador Volker is impressing upon that official that President Zelensky should not investigate his own political opponents. What was thrown back in the face of Ambassador Volker?
After Ambassador Volker suggested to Mr. Yermak not investigate the Ukraine, Mr. Yermak said back to him, you're encouraging us to investigate Biden's and Clinton's.
During Watergate, the famous phrase from Senator Howard Baker was asked, what did the president know and when did he know it? There's a reason that no one here has repeated those questions during these hearings. We know what the president did, and we know when he knew it. Mr. Goldman, who sent Rudy Giuliani to Ukraine to smear Joe Biden? Who fired the anti-attacker in Ukraine, Marie Ivanovich?
President
Trump. Who told Ambassador Volker to work with Rudy Giuliani on Ukraine?
President Trump.
Who told Vice to not go to President Zelensky's inauguration?
President Trump.
Who ordered his own chief, Mick Mulvaney, to withhold critical military assistance for
President Trump?
Who meet with President Zelensky in the Oval Office?
President Trump.
Who ignored on July 25 his own National Security Council's anti-corruption talk?
President Trump.
Who asked President Zelensky for a favor? President Zelensky to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden.
President Trump.
Who stood on the White House lawn and wanted Ukraine to investigate Vice President Biden?
President Trump.
Who stood on that same lawn and said that China should also investigate Vice President Biden?
President Trump.
As to anything that we do not know, who has blocked us from knowing it?
President Trump in the White House.
So as it relates to President Trump, is he an incidental player or a central player in this scheme?
President Trump is the central player in this scheme.
There's a reason no one has said, what did and when did he know it? From the evidence that you have presented, Mr. Goldman, and in the Intelligence Committee's findings, we know one thing, and one thing is clear. This scheme, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, knew everything. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Castro, what's the evidence?
When a witness testifies to it.
And what's your say?
Our court statement, all for the truth of the matter asserted, is something that you learn in law school.
Federal rules of evidence adopted by most states. Hearsay is inadmissible unless the testimony follows a defined exception. Is that right?
That's right. There's about 20 visual exceptions.
And I believe you're present when every witness testified, including Mr. Solomon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a yes?
Yes.
And much of the Democrats' report and impeachment narrative is based on the Solomon testimony. Is that a fair characterization?
A lot of it is, yes.
How many times did Mr. Intel Committee's report?
Like I said, I did a search, just a control F, and the name Sondland shows up 611 times.
Yeah, and just to refresh your mind, Sondland himself told the world that basically nobody else on the planet told him that Donald Trump was trying to tie aid to investigations. In fact, he also said everything that he'd been testifying to is simply his presumptions. Is that right?
That is correct.
And so when we consider what a presumption is, it's not direct, it's not circumstantial, it's not even hearsay. In fact, we typically, when we're trying the case, we consider it as speculation. Is that right?
That's right.
Do courts allow speculation in? Why not?
Because it's not reliable.
It's inherently unreliable. So,
Can you name any Democrat witness who asserted that he or she had direct evidence of those 7 hearings that we heard from?
We had some direct evidence on certain things. We had some direct evidence on the May 23rd meeting. And Sondland gave some direct evidence. But a lot of what we've obtained has been circumstantial.
How about with regard to personal knowledge of the quid pro quo allegation?
Well, we have not gotten to the bottom of that from a direct evidence standpoint.
How about tying aid to investigations?
That's correct too.
How about political motives in asking for investigation?
The facts surrounding that are ambiguous.
In the non-legalistic world, when we talk about speculation, we typically use words like innuendo. Is that right?
Yep.
And isn't it true that the only direct evidence that we have is that Ukraine received the aid without giving anything in return? President Zelensky has repeatedly stated no pressure, no problem with the phone call in relationship with Mr. Trump, and that the president had a legitimate concern about Ukraine corruption.
He did, and the burden sharing.
So much has been made about the alleged desire for a nation. But again, there is no direct that supports the allegation that merely the announcement of an investigation.
But like I said, there's 8 lines in the call to go to what President Trump said about the investigations. 8 lines.
And everything else is hearsay in your right?
Inconclusive, certainly.
Yeah. So when we get into this event today in the process, we start talking about the process. Were you surprised to see Mr. Burke get out of his chair, move to the seat, and sit down next to the chairman and start asking questions?
I don't know if I.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I was, and it looks like Mr. Burke has been disappeared. And so that's one of the outrageous things about this process, and it's been outrageous from start to finish. We've seen prejudice and bias against the president from start to finish. We have the lion's share, almost 2/3 of the members of the Democrats have already voted to impeach at least one, and that's before anything with regard to this July 25th telephone conversation ever. And we're left with a constant view that as on November 9th, 2016, Representative wanted to begin impeachment proceedings at that point. Is that correct?
Yes.
January 20th, 2017, Washington Post, headline, let the impeachment begin. Is that correct?
Yes.
10 days later, Mr. Zaid, who is the attorney for the whistleblower, tweeted out, let the impeachment begin, let the coup begin, and victory to the lawyers. Is that right?
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah. We had people who on this committee came out today and said that they went on TV and said, we wanted to start impeachment earlier, but the speaker held us back. Did you see that?
I haven't seen that. No.
Yeah. You wouldn't be
news reports today.
Yeah, you wouldn't be about that though, would you?
No.
No, about that. This is a hearing, 3 years that they've been trying to remove this president, and this is the culmination of a predetermined outcome. That's where we are today. And so with that, we bring it back to the same points. No pressure, no conditionality, and all of the aid meetings called to Ukraine. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, Mr. Liu.
Nadler. Let's just cut through all the Republican arguments today and make things very simple. No one else in America could do what Donald Trump did and get away with it. No American could call off a foreign government official and ask
Hillary can actually do it and get away with
it. This Judiciary Committee can call up a foreign government official and ask for help in a re-election campaign. If we did that and got caught, we would likely be. Now let's focus on the president's abuse of power in this case, because it's actually worse than examples I just gave. And I know that I first swore an oath to the Constitution when I joined the United States Air Force on active duty. And the 3 core values I learned were integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. I'd like to focus on the first 2, integrity first and service before self, because it's ingrained in all military members that we cannot mix official duties with personal private gain. And in this case, the $391 million at issue, that wasn't Donald Trump's money. That was U.S. taxpayer funds. Is that right?
Yes.
And certainly the president taxpayer money for his own personal benefit, and especially not to leverage it for his own re-election campaign. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
The president's abuse of power is even worse in this case, using official duties for private gain. It's also just flat out illegal. You cannot solicit foreign assistance, and that's a violation of Federal Election Campaign Act. Multiple people have gone to prison for violating various sections of that act. A reasonable person could also conclude that the president violated the Impeachment Control Act of 1974, which Congress passed as a response to President Nixon's abuse of power. So I'd like to explore that a little further with you, Mr. Goldman. In this case, Congress, with bipartisan support, taxpayer funds for the specific purpose of aiding Ukraine in its war against Russia. Is that right?
Yes.
And not only had that money been appropriated, the money had actually been released to the Department of Defense. Is that right?
They were about to release it, yes.
Okay. And then suddenly, without explanation, the president demanded that those taxpayer funds be withheld from an ally who desperately needed the aid. Mr. Goldman, did the president notify Congress about his decision to withhold the aid?
No, he did not.
So the Impeachment Control Act was designed to prevent the president from secretly taking congressionally appropriated funds and doing whatever he wants with them. So is it true that in your intelligence report, the following any findings of fact, President Trump ordered the suspension of $391 million in vital military assistance urgently needed by Ukraine, and the president did so despite his obligations under the Impeachment Control Act. Did you find that?
Yes.
Right. So not only did the president abuse his gain, and not only was it illegal, his actions also harmed U.S. national security. So it's a fundamental tenet of U.S. national security to push back against Russian aggression. Ukraine's pushing back against Russian aggression. Is it true, Mr. Goldman, that harming the Ukrainian military also harms U.S. national security?
That's what pretty much every witness said.
Last week, Professor Carlin confirmed that it is an impeachable offense to sacrifice the national interests for his own private ends. Shows what she said. Mr. Goldman, based on the evidence that you found in your report, is it fair to conclude that the president's actions both leverage taxpayer funds for his own private gain and sacrifice the national interests for his own private ends?
That is what we found.
I was also particularly struck by Mr. Holmes' testimony because it makes it clear that the president did not care about our foreign policy or U.S. national security. He only cared about investigating his political opponent. Here's what Mr. Holmes said.
Ambassador Sondland stated that the president only cares about big stuff. I noted there was big stuff going on in Ukraine, like a war with Russia. And Ambassador Sondland replied that he meant big stuff that benefits the president, like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was pushing.
Look, here's the thing. If any military member used official acts for personal gain, that member would no longer be part of the military. And in fact, last year, a Navy commander was convicted for taking things of value in exchange for official acts. The U.S. attorney who prosecuted the case said the commander, quote, put his own selfish interests ahead of the Navy and of our nation, unquote. We should not hold the commander-in-chief to a lower standard than regular military members. We should not hold the president to a different standard than any other elected official. No one is above the law. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. McClintock.
You know, in every
Hey,
election,
Lori.
side wins, and
I was just
democracy only works because
just
the
doing
losing
this.
side always respect of the voters. The moment that social compact breaks down, democracy
I don't know.
collapses into chaos.
These
That's only
people,
happened twice in our
you know,
nation's history. It happened in 1860.
these people, I don't know if you can hear me over the desktop. These people are out of their minds. Super Dave. I've had this live stream going. I've done been to town, did a job interview, start Wednesday. Come back, it's still live. You don't have to hang out. I was fixing to end this thing. Anyhow. Check this out. Let me get this stuff off the screen. Stormy Daniels. That was.
Impeachment is one of the most serious.
Donald Trump 2020 bill.
It requires an overwhelming case.
Oh, that's upside down.
clear evidence that a vast
I thought that was cool.
Constitution vests the
Donald Trump, 2020. I'm not political by any means, but this is historical, man. There's never been a takedown of the American aid so public until now. So I'm just kind of documenting it. It probably sounds weird. I got the speakers going, but that's because I'm trying to listen to it. Man, it's been raining. 4 inches of snow by tomorrow night. It's gonna start it. Look, it's 63 degrees right now. We're fixing to have thunderstorms, and by in the morning, it's gonna turn over. It's gonna drop down, and we're gonna get freezing rain and sleet, and they're gonna snow, and it's gonna last from like what they're showing. It's starting at like 6 in the morning, and it's gonna be wintry all the way to like 9 o'clock at night. They are, man, these people are engineering our weather so bad. Whew, I need to fix 7 and 8 yet.
They've argued that the right to confront your accuser is an invasion of the accuser's privacy. They've argued that appealing to the courts to defend your conscience is the president.
That makes it sound weird when I do that. I thought about all I gotta do is go over here to my start streaming, and I can start streaming this over on D Live while I'm too. I was doing that earlier. Motives, of course, to be defined entirely by the accusers. I just because I've never seen anything this crazy in my life. They're trying to overthrow the government, man. They're trying to kick because they don't like the changes that he's making for the better. I know, that's all it is, a clown show, man. It's crazy. Democrats are fond of saying no one's above the law. But they have one unspoken caveat, except for themselves. That guy's exactly right. What should be a solemn, painstaking, thorough, and above all, fair priority. Yeah, they say nobody's above the law, but look at what the Democrats do. Look at this bull crap I've been halfway watching all day. The fact that Mr. Schiff doesn't dare to appear before this committee to defend his work. We're supposed to accept his report of today's. All Trump is doing is letting these people get enough rope to hang themselves, man. This is the scum at the bottom of the swamp. We can only pray the Senate still. You know, you drain up with scum. Well, all these Democrats are the scum, and that's gonna get scraped off the bottom. Our democracy, our institutions, our principles of justice, our country. Oh man. Who I start my new job Wednesday, Super Day. Thank you. It's 5 o'clock in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon. Our days, but it's only 4 days a week. I'll have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. Above the rule of law and above the national security, the framers set against a potential tyrant. These people are out of their minds. That looks crazy right there, doesn't it? Now, it looked like President Trump get away straight down. After all, most Americans didn't know anything about it. All Trump did was ask them to investigate the corruption. He didn't say investigate Joe Biden. But these Democrats are like, oh no, if they investigate, it's going to get Joe Biden entangled in it. So we need to stop this and act like Trump said, let's investigate Joe Biden, and he didn't. And then they want to say that's election meddling. Well, what do you think this thing is? It's election meddling. Buy some firewood today, and I can't get a hold of the guy that I buy my wood from. It's gonna be cold, man, and there's no wood around here I can cut up. None of it's any good.
And that moved me a lot because my father was the staffer on the National Security Council under President Kennedy. And he said the most important thing we do every day is your conscience. And he devoted his career to the idea that people must speak truth to power when power becomes a clear and present danger to democracy.
Oh, I don't know. Oh my God.
Mr. Goldman, who is Dr.
We
have immediate openings out at TN and train on day shift and then move to second shift. The pay does start off at $9 an hour, but you do get monthly raises.
Not interested. Almost. Now I got jobs coming in all over the place. I don't know who's lurking. Well, I'm watching it on YouTube. I'm only showing 2 on the StreamYard. I mean, showing 4. I don't know. I've been putting this. Hey, for all y'all people out there lurking, hit the like button, please. Jim G. I've been sick of it, but I want to witness all these lies they're telling, man. I've never seen so many lies in my life. And they keep referring to a previous lie as the evidence is in what so-and-so said. Well, that was a... Do I have my mic on? Yeah. But, I mean, it's bullcrap. They want to say he's election meddling. Well, this impeachment is election meddling. I mean, come on. But this is historic, man. We're watching a part of our government try to overthrow the government, and they're running on their being constitutional. They're anti-constitution.
All of these state department witnesses in particular, and frankly, almost all of the witnesses took unbelievable meticulous notes.
Man, I need to check on my coffee. I just got some coffee going. You know, almost first loses themselves to get a prize. Who are you? Oh, it's not tearing. Hey, Jim G, it's not tearing the country apart. When Trump drained the swamp, it left scum on the bottom of the swamp, right? Well, the scum is these Democrats here. And the only way to get scum out of the bottom, you got to scrape it out. So that's what he's doing. He's just giving them enough rope, you know, hang themselves. What are supposed to have done to them. Hey, UFO factor fiction, man. Hey, hang on. I know. Do I have you? Let me check. On hers.
Are you sick and
Oh
tired
yeah.
of this impeachment sham? And America, would you like Congress to get back to work and actually get something done?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I got you. UFO factor fiction.
And I would like yes or no answer.
I don't think they're in here anymore. Shadrach and
Did
Jenny.
any of the Democrats back witnesses
I know y'all probably hearing an echo, but I'm trying to listen to this too. I could put headphones on, then y'all wouldn't. Y'all can listen. I'm gonna show you how this mic off.
Listened in on the phone call. He testified that he was not concerned that anything discussed on the phone call was illegal or improper. Is
Mic
that
on.
correct?
Mic off.
Several Democrat witnesses testified that it is fairly
Mic
common
on.
for foreign aid to be
Mic
paused
off.
for various reasons, including concerns.
So I gotta
that
turn the
country
sound
is
way down. It kind of makes a little weird echo.
And that's
But that's good for when I'm playing music. It won't copyright it because it's adding extra notes. I mean, it's a yeah, and MG, these Democrats trying to say they're patriots and Constitution. They're calling for their side to bear arms. We've got to defend this great Constitution. The whole time they're stomping on the Constitution or wiping their butts with the Constitution. I mean, come on.
That's correct. According to New York Times, Hunter Biden was part of a broad effort by Burisma to bring in well-connected Democrats during a period when the company was facing. Is that correct?
Yeah, the New York had a
I'm gonna mute my mic so I can turn this up and hear it better myself.
Deputy Assistant Secretary of State George Kent testified that he raised concerns directly to Vice President Biden's office about Hunter Biden's services on Burisma's board. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Castor, in the July 25th call, President Trump referenced Joe Biden bragging about how he stopped the prosecution. We also saw that earlier today. Joe Biden bragged about how he told if the prosecutor is not fired, the money. Mr. Castor, is this the same prosecutor that looked into Burisma?
It is.
If I was on D-Live,
Obama Assistant Attorney General said, and I quote, awarding prestigious employment opportunities to unqualified individuals in order to influence government officials is corruption, plain and simple. This here is another key question. Given that, one, Burisma had a reputation of being a corrupt company. Two, Obama's own State Department was concerned about Hunter Burisma's board at the same time that Vice President Biden was acting as the point person to you. And three, Obama's Assistant Attorney General said in a similar scheme that corruption, that there was corruption, plain and simple. Do you think then it is reasonable and acceptable for President Trump to ask the Ukrainian president to look into the Hunter Biden Burisma potential corruption scheme?
Yes.
boom!
Mr. Castor,
You're right,
undisputable
Super Dave.
facts that will never change that prove there is no impeachable offense. There was no quid pro quo on the July 25th call. Ukraine leadership did not know the aid was held up at the time of the July.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jim G. Don't piss me off. I laugh at it because Trump will be president. Trump's gonna make it to 2020. Hey, y'all see?
Vice President Johnson at a meeting, not at the White House, but at the in New York at the United Nations.
Mr. Castor,
Trump
did Mr.
2020.
Turley testify in the past hearing that this inquiry has not passed Chairman Nadler? I yield back.
Thank you. And let's look at the Republican claim that President Trump withheld military aid to Ukraine, probably concerned about corruption rather than the fact that he abused his office for personal gain. And let me be clear, we actually do not have to read the president's mind. As your report notes on page 10, and as we will see on television, he told us himself exactly what his intent was.
No, it ain't working, Super Dave.
simple answer.
So the first and best witness about the president's corrupt intent was Donald Trump. There is also plenty of corroborating evidence, so let's just review some of the
He was
basic
just
facts we've
stating
already
fact. You sit there and look into the corruption, you're gonna find them, man. They're in the top.
of his President Zelensky, and he disregarded all of the talking points that were on corruption by the National Security Council. Second, investigations of the Bidens and a debunked conspiracy theory of the 2016 election were not supported by U.S. policy. Third, Congress authorized Ukraine passed
Exactly, Jim G. That's what we all need to do. That's what our Second Amendment's for, to bear arms against foreign and domestic enemies. And we have domestic enemies in the White House right now doing this crap right here. I mean, I'm not saying let's go shoot them. I'm just saying that's why we haven't, that they're trying to take away.
The president never conducted an actual review assessment on Ukraine, did he?
I'm following Donald Trump on Twitter.
Investigation of any sort related to the Ukraine aid.
And isn't it also true that the defense can actually determine and conduct a review on Ukraine after the president approved the military aid? He already met all of the corruption benchmarks in May.
Yes, and everyone.
I'll be right back, y'all.
Ukraine policy believed that they were on the right side.
And in addition to Ukraine had relevant corruption assessments prior to U.S. military aid being withheld, there is significant witness testimony that both the State Department and the embassy actually advised that a White House meeting with President helped further an anti-corruption agenda, correct?
Both the anti-corruption agenda and the fighting the aggression from Russia.
And in fact, President Trump's budget actually funding for fighting corruption in Ukraine. Mr. Castor argues that President Trump withheld military aid because he was skeptical of foreign assistance in general. But in both 2017 and 2018, didn't President Trump aid for Ukraine without any complaints about corruption?
That's correct.
So, Mr. Bowman, the president was perfectly fine giving military aid to Ukraine in 2017 and 2018 in 2019. So what changed?
He started running for president.
Vice President Biden started running. So the
and I would add the Mueller report came out. The president and his campaign welcoming from Russia and utilizing it.
And the sequence of events and all the corroborating evidence makes it crystal clear that President Trump didn't care about corruption at all. In fact, he told himself that he cared about his own politically motivated investigations to his political rival. And you saw the clip where Ambassador Sondland picked up the phone, called President Trump, and then Mr. Holmes asked him what the president, and quickly, what was Mr. Sondland's answer?
Mr. Sondland said the president does not give a bleep about Ukraine. He only cares about the big stuff, meaning the Biden investigation was pushing. And by the way, just to add, that is a direct evidence conversation with President Trump and Ambassador Sondland never meet on the minority.
So we know what President Trump is interested in: words, his actions, and this testimony. The President of the United States wanted to use an investigation into a political rival for his own personal political benefit to interfere in our election, and he was willing to use military aid, taxpayer dollars, and in this meeting as his leverage.
Man, we don't need to build prisons. We need to build gallows so we can hang them all. Then you ain't got to work. You can never get rid of that corruption.
Let me get we're here because Democrats are terrified. President Trump is going to win. Let me get into this.
That's the truth.
Because Democrats don't want to talk about the red hot Trump economy. They don't want to talk about the fact that we have the lowest unemployment rate 50 years. You're dealing with impeachment. Democrats don't want to talk about how the president has worked to protect American companies from China's aggression, how he's renegotiated to benefit American workers, how he's eliminated burdensome regulations that hurt the economy, job creators. Congressional Democrats don't want to be people. That the Democratic agenda includes such laughable ideas like giving illegal immigrants taxpayer-funded health care and taking private health insurance away from the American people. That's right here. This whole process is just a distraction. It's an attempt to hide the far left radical agenda.
It's election meddling.
About the facts. Schitt's report claims the administration froze military aid to Ukraine without explanation. Yet the facts are that President Trump gave more military aid to Ukraine than President Obama. President Obama gave Ukraine well wishes and blankets. President Trump gave Ukraine missiles. That's the difference, and those are the facts. Let's go over some more facts. House Democrats want to claim it's a conspiracy that Ukrainian officials attempted to intervene in elections. Yet Ukrainian attempts to interfere with the 2016 election are well documented by Politico, by Financial Times, and The Hill. There was an attempt to influence our elections. And that's President Trump brought it to the attention of President Zelensky. Again, those are the facts. At the end of the day, those facts don't seem to matter to my Democrat colleagues. House Democrats don't care that President Zelensky has repeatedly said.
Yeah, we will, Super Dave.
It's not important the call transcript was the best evidence we have.
This is the deal I got, though. If they purge a lot of channels and those change, then you're going to lose subscribers. What if after tomorrow they don't purge me, purge 500 channels that were subscribed to me? I'm back to square one again.
Because the fact is, the Democrats are calling for even begin. Representative Lee, I don't even think he was sworn in yet. He said in January, impeach them all. Representative Green said, and I quote, "I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, we'll get reelected." These proceedings, this entire process, is nothing more than a political.
Unknown, Jim G.
Democrat colleagues actually do care about the facts, which is why I'm troubled that our committee did not hear from a single fact witness this entire time. We shouldn't be here hearing. We should be here hearing from Hunter Biden. We should be hearing from Schiff's staff. We know that Schiff's staff coordinated. Again, we need to hear from the whistleblower. Last week, I subpoenaed the whistleblower to testify in executive session, meaning that he or she can testify behind closed doors. Democrat colleagues down versus fashion. Mr. Casper, can you walk through the
But the complaint they told us is that it's from an outsider who received information secondhand presented in the complaint is clearly distorted. And it's from a person who is, it seems to be making a case, like an advocate about what happened on the call. The whistleblower wrote individuals inside the White House and at the State Department that he or she has spoken to form the basis of the complaint. We have not been able to piece together all those people, and talking to all those isn't. And I'm running out of time here, but there's, Senko in where witnesses have told us it's likely Shokin. Vindman and Morrison's testimony about why they went to talk to the lawyers.
The gentleman's time is
I don't believe
expired.
he was on the call.
Your time's up. We're scared you're going to put out a good point.
Mr. Goldman, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I saw significant firsthand evidence that President Trump conditioned our military aid on Ukraine announcing investigations into the 2016 election and the Bidens and betrayed security interests in the process. For example, Ambassador Sondland told us that once the Ukrainians found out about the aid being withheld, it was made absolutely clear to them that if they wanted the aid, they were going to have to make these statements. Mr. Goldman, beginning on and around the 25th of July call through September, would you agree that, consistent with the testimony we just reviewed, you made aware that received military aid that they were going to have to make a statement investigations?
Over the mayor, President proxy Rudy Giuliani, and then Trump himself through Ambassador Sondland, who and Andre Yermak 7, and told them what President Trump had confirmed to him that he was on the investigation.
And by the end of August, President Zelensky in fact meant to make that statement.
I'm confused too. I don't know what's gonna happen.
After months getting involved.
But these people are crazy here. These people are just like the people running YouTube.
As Ambassador Sondland told them that he before President Trump got caught and released the
I want you to break your chin in front of you, which displays again a Washington Post article from September 5th. The headline says Trump tries to force Ukraine.
And what I don't understand, if they purge people, why? I mean, why would you do that? You got people that are just watchers that don't so have to either piss off and not never come back on YouTube. Got new live set up for Twitter.
Military aid the country needs and to extort it. So am I correct, Mr. Goldman, that by September 25th, allegations that President Trump used aid to pressure Ukraine's investigation was being widely reported?
Sorry, by what date?
September 5th.
Widely reported that certainly the aid being withheld was widely reported.
And by September 9th, our investigative committees formally announced into the president of these issues, to the president. And Mr. Goldman.
Read it correctly, please. Read your script correctly, woman.
After the investigations were announced, and 2 days after the Inspector General told the intelligence a complaint that was being withheld.
So then am I correct that as the timeline on the screen in front of you showed, it wasn't until after the whistleblower complaint, after the war, and after Congress launched the investigation that President Trump released the aid?
And I would add one briefly to the Congressman's point. It is true that President Trump has given more military assistance than President Obama. And so I would wonder if he does support military assistance so much, why then is he holding for the 2 months?
And the fact people at the NSC, in fact, the Congress's investigation might have the effect of releasing the whole military aid because it would be potentially putting to justify the aid. Is that correct, Mr. Goldman?
That was the testimony, yes.
In other words,
that was the testimony. It wasn't the fact.
Me angry that this president thinks he can get away with it, but he got caught, and he tried to cover it up. Won't let him do that. We thank God for the true, courageous public servant.
We won't let them do that. Hands up! Don't shoot.
Everybody counts, but everybody is accountable, us including the President of the United States. Thank you, and I yield back. Thank you.
She must be related to Jesse Jackson or Al Shoosh. What's his name?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Goldman, my colleagues keep talking about the fact that the president apparently said, and I quote, no quid pro quo on September 7th in a call with Ambassador Sondland. Mr. Goldman, did you receive testimony about the September 7th call?
Yes, we received 3 witnesses about it. And, it gets a little complicated, but that's the consistent refrain.
It shouldn't get complicated. You got witnesses.
Quite a little bit. Ambassador Sondland described that call to Mr. Morrison that same day, correct?
That's right.
And Mr. Morrison then reported it to him, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And both Mr. Morrison and Ambassador Taylor took notes of those discussions.
They did.
Were those the committee?
They were not produced to us, but the witnesses said that they relied on their notes to provide their testimony.
That set of notes was blocked consistent with the president's direction.
Correct.
And in his recitation to Mr. Morrison, Ambassador Sondland said that President Trump himself used the word pro quo.
Mr. Sondland also said that too, yes.
And Mr. Goldman, what did the committee make of this fact?
Well, it was quite odd that the president would volunteer and respond out a quid pro quo, but there was no quid pro quo. Well, I was just going to say, what's even more important, he said immediately after, is effectively conduct that amounts to a quid pro quo. He said there's no quid pro quo. You to make this announcement.
Let's talk about that. He makes of the fact that according to Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Morrison, right after no quid pro quo, President Trump then told Ambassador Sondland that Ukraine President Zelensky would have to go to the microphone and announce the investigations of Biden and the 2016 election interference, and that President Zelensky.
Right. We have a number of different accounts of this, and I think this is
up on the board here.
Right. Yeah. Ambassador Taylor said that. Mr. Morrison said similar. Their understandings of that conversation. There's a clear directive was a pro quo fraction of the action. About the words, and Zelensky said no pressure, and Trump said no pressure, and no. And investigators are probably.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. It's not me.
You need to look at the actions to understand what those words mean. And that's why this call in particular is so important.
So let's go further. As you discussed, individuals reacted with concern to President Trump's call. Do you recall,
Mr. Morrison said that he was shocked, I think, and sinking feeling, correct? And then he went and then talked to the lawyers at the direction of Ambassador Bolton.
And Mr. Goldman, Ambassador Taylor also testified was conditioned on Zelensky announcing the investigations, and he testified that this was illogical, crazy, and wrong. That was
what Ambassador Taylor testified to, yes.
Now, my colleagues have also pointed out that on September.
I don't like showing my face either, Jim. It's about as
has been crystal clear that there is no quid pro quo.
But man, you ain't got to show your face. At least upload it before midnight.
His text, he seems to believe that the aid was conditioned on the announcement of investigations.
Yes, some public testimony revealed at least 2 precisely false that were not true, including that there was no quid pro quo of any kind when he testified, and we saw the video earlier, that there assuredly was as it related to the White House meeting.
And this September 7th call and the September 9th text occurred after the
Shoot, do the sawmill.
That is after the press report.
I'd like to see that.
Military aid on investigations of his political rival.
Oh.
Correct.
Yes, and It also, this text occurred after President Trump's message to President Zelensky.
Mr. Goldman, did the investigative committee receive any other evidence relevant to the credibility of the president's assertion that there was no quid pro quo?
We received
I'm probably gonna end this thing in like 6 minutes, because that'll be 3 hours even.
Mr. Chairman, I have
I'm tired of all this blah 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 blah. We don't want to be president.
My questions. Thank you.
It'll be very brief. It's just unanimous consent.
I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Goldman, you talked about actions speaking louder than words. So I want to focus on why it was an abuse of power for President Trump to use the American government to pressure the Ukraine president to benefit his reelection campaign. Let's look at what the president said in his July 25th call to the president of Ukraine. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman listened to the president's call and testified that when President Trump asked Ukraine for a favor, it wasn't a friendly request, it was really a demand. Put your attention to this slide, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's testimony. Why did he say the president demand?
He said because the power disparity between the United States as the greatest power in the world and Ukraine, which is so dependent on the United States, not just for the military or all of its support, made such a President Zelensky could not say no.
It basically made it a demand.
This vast power disparity.
What?
Ukraine has been at war with Russia since 5 years ago, and over 13,000 of the Ukraine people have died. Is that correct?
And not only does the U.S. provide 10% of their military budget, states as a critical ally in rallying other countries to support Ukraine. Europe actually gives 4 or 5, the European Union gives, I think, 4 times as much money as the United States overall to Ukraine.
So President Trump knew that the Ukrainian president's back was against the wall and President Zelensky needed U.S. validation. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, according to the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine, and we have Ambassador Taylor's testimony up there, it wasn't until after Ambassador Sondland told the Ukrainians that there would be a, quote, stalemate, end quote, on the aid that Zelensky agreed to announce the investigations that President Trump was demanding, correct?
That's right, yes.
And furthermore, the committee heard testimony that the Ukrainians felt they had, quote, no choice but to comply with President Trump's demands, correct?
That's right, yes. Even after the aid was released.
In front of President Trump, remember whether he felt pressured, President Zelensky said, quote, I'm sorry, but I don't want to be involved to Democratic open election USA, end quote. Is that right?
That sounds right if you're reading the quote, yes.
Okay. Now, the president and some of his defenders here have tried to excuse his misconduct by pointing to statements from the Ukraine president that he was not under pressure to give in to President Trump's. Did your
I'm a loner too, Jim.
Statements by President Zelensky?
That's why I live out in the middle of the woods. Just me and my little dog. That's it.
An extortion victim are not particularly relevant to.
I haven't even checked on my back neighbor in a couple of weeks.
Cannot, in reality, for the same reasons that he interpreted the
Well,
request.
thank you, Jim.
He can't go out and say that he did feel pressure because that would potentially.
Your family, Jim. You can always come to our lives if we're still here.
Could almost say it's similar to hostage arrest.
It is certainly a
Man, they're twisting so much crap. It's crazy.
When the president made these statements, and up to and including today, this country was still under attack by Russia, still hadn't gotten a meeting.
Look, y'all, I'm going to shut this thing down like a minute and 20 seconds. I appreciate y'all hanging around. This is really boring, but it's historical. It's an overthrow of our government in the public eyes, and I just wanted to kind of get this documented.
and abuse the power to do that by using the dollars basically to get what he wants, right?
Using our taxpayer dollars. Well, look what y'all are doing. Y'all are using you know what else, some taxpayer dollars doing this. All right, how many times? How come they don't say quid pro quo or whatever when the government sits there and tells another country, if you do this, we're gonna wipe you off the face of the earth? Isn't that a pro quo or whatever you call it? I mean, come on. I'm not into it yet. What's he saying? Hang on, I'm gonna mute my mic.
I'd ask for uniform consent, or you should be unanimous consent to two letters.
The gentleman will suspend. The gentleman, who's seeking unanimous consent? What are you considering? For what are you seeking unanimous consent?
Mr. Chairman, I have two letters addressed to you, one December 4, 2019, and one December 5th, 2019.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Mr. Chairman, I have a brief parliamentary inquiry regarding scheduling.
From Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, I expressed concern regarding the deeply flawed and partisan process the Democrat majority has been undertaking during this impeachment inquiry. Mr. Chairman, I'm particularly reminded of your quote: "There must never be a narrowly voted impeachment or an impeachment substantially supported by one of our major political parties and largely opposed by the other. Such an impeachment would lack legitimacy, would produce divisiveness and bitterness in our politics for years to come, and will call into question the very
Using his
legitimacy
own
of our
words
political
against them.
institutions." You made that statement back in 1998. Now, I'm glad we're moving on to presenting the quote-unquote evidence gathered in this report, not to hear from direct fact witnesses, but a 300-page report that's built largely on hearsay, opinion, and speculation. And I'm especially outraged that the purported author of it, Chairman Schiff, is not here to answer our questions today. Now that we have the report and can discuss the facts within, or the lack thereof, there are 4 facts that will never change. Both President Trump and President Zelensky say there was no pressure. Second, the call transcript shows no conditionality between investigation. 3, Ukrainians were not aware that aid was withheld when the president spoke. And 4th, Ukraine didn't open an investigation but still received President Trump. I want to move on to the idea of hearsay and the fact that this report contains so much of it and relies on so much of it. Mr. Castor, did the Democrats' impeachment report rely on hearsay to support their assertions?
Yes, it did.
How many times were you able to find assertions based on hearsay?
We went through and counted over 50 instances of key facts.
Can you give us some of the examples of the hearsay being relied on by the majority to make their case?
You know, a lot of the information Ambassador Taylor was communicating, you know, he very diligently recorded notes about what some of the various officials told him, but it was about, you know, it was 1 and 2 steps removed from the actual fact. And that's the problem with hearsay, is that it's a whisper down the lane situation. If some of the people that are doing whispering are predisposed to not like President Trump, then what the lane becomes even more distorted.
See you later, Jim G. Thanks for hanging out.
Witnesses, speculations, and presumptions.
And Super Dave, if you're still out there, I'm probably gonna end this thing.
Hearing is Sondland presuming
This is,
that the aid was tied to the
I was just doing this to be doing something.
He engaged in a back and forth with Mr. Turner. Nobody on the planet told him.
But yeah, I'm gonna end this. I appreciate y'all coming in.
Foreign policy and the idea that somehow.
And I'll holler at y'all later. I'm probably not gonna go live.
Repeatedly.
Cold. Well, I might the snow and the snowstorm that's coming.
The president said foreign policy for
I'm gonna go ahead and hang 3 hours of full.
Section 2, in fact.
Yeah.
But y'all have a
Give us
good night.
examples of these members. of
I'll
the
see
foreign
y'all later.
policy Establishment who president's foreign policy direction and choices.
For example, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman testified in the call